The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today I'm reading from The Prophet's Way, A Guide to Living in the Now. It's actually a compilation of mostly, there's some commentary in there, but mostly it's diaries and letters that I sent to friends on travels around the world, and it's kind of a autobiography, I suppose, of sorts. This is from chapter, I don't know what the chapter number is. It's titled Life in a Teepee. It's on page 25. And it starts with a quote from Lenny Bruce. Every day people are straying away from the church and going back to God. My best friend through school was Clark Stinson. We met when we were 13, and instead of pursuing the normal pastimes of teenagers, we spent our time studying Sanskrit. We had an old study guide book I found in my father's library, reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and arguing minutiae from the Bible. Clark's mother was interested in metaphysics and shared a book called Autobiography of a Yogi with us. Years later, when I went to Detroit with her and Clark to attend an initiation in Kriya Yoga by Yogacharya Oliver Black, the oldest living disciple of Yogananda, I recognized Yogananda's Kriya technique as identical to an ancient Coptic exercise Master Stanley had taught us years earlier called the Cobra Breath. I introduced Clark to Master Stanley and Lee, and Clark and I began a serious study of spirituality. We were both in our late teens by then, and Clark had recently married. I was recovering from a painful breakup with a girlfriend, and we agreed that to do our spiritual work best, we should seek isolation. So Clark and his wife bought a teepee, and I bought one, and we three gave away everything else we owned in the world except some clothes and our spiritual books. We bought 100 pounds of wheat, 100 pounds of dried fruits, some basic camping equipment, and got a ride up into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where an old trapper led us on a 3-day trek back into the Chippewa National Forest to a small lake that isn't on most maps. We spent the summer there, Clark and his wife on one side of the lake, me on the other. 3 days a week, we practiced silence and did meditation and prayer every day for hours. I had a pet tachinid fly, a small insect that looks like a honeybee but is actually a fly. When I'd meditate in the morning on my blanket outside my teepee, he'd come and hover just over my right hand as if he were drawing nourishment from me. Sometimes he'd hover there for as much as 20 minutes. Occasionally, he'd land and walk around with careful steps like an astronaut exploring a distant but friendly planet. I also shared my teepee with a large and furry brown and black wolf spider who came out at night as the sun set and picked the sleeping mosquitoes off the canvas on the west side of my teepee. I watched the play of life and death, predator and prey. Here's an odd synchronicity that Carl Jung would have appreciated. I haven't seen a tachinid fly for years, but as I'm typing these words into a laptop computer on my back porch in Atlanta, one just hovered over my left hand for a few moments and then landed. He's here with me as I'm typing, sitting on my hand. One cold and rainy afternoon, Clark and I were walking through the woods looking for berries and edible plants. We'd gotten pretty skilled at identifying what was safe and what wasn't, and we're filling a bag with leaves and fruits. This must be what our ancestors lived like, Clark observed, hunting and gathering. Except we're vegetarians, so we're just gathering, I said, joking. But to Clark, it wasn't a joke. Seriously, what we call civilization started when humans started farming. But humans like us were around for tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of years before that, fully conscious, awake, aware, thinking and feeling just like us. But they were hunters and gatherers instead of farmers. I said, without agriculture, there'd be no civilization. It was an interesting thought. Remember Miss Hemmer? Clark said. Miss Hemmer had been our 8th grade biology teacher and one of the best teachers I'd ever known in my life. Clark and I had conspired to make her life difficult, but we also loved her and learned more from her each month than from any of our other teachers in a year. And she was a huge fan of Margaret Mead. Clark said, she said that in primitive societies, there isn't suicide, depression, drug addiction, all that stuff. The noble savage, I said, shivering. I'm skeptical and cold. And the Indians who lived here once were probably cold too. He shrugged and said, this life seems much more natural to me. At least I had to agree with that. A few days later, Clark came running over to my teepee with his Bible all excited. Look at this, he said, pointing to Genesis 4:2. It says, Cain was a tiller of the ground. The Bible is talking about how the first murderer was also the first farmer. And in the 25th verse, it makes it clear that Abel, the brother who was not the farmer, was the one who loved God the most. So what, I said. It's a classic archetype of the oldest child being the most beloved, but also the one who screws up. It's all over, from Greek mythology to Shakespeare. Don't you see, Clark said? Adam and Eve were gatherers like we are now. They walked around the Garden of Eden and picked up food. But then they tasted of the knowledge of good and evil, of life and death. That's your food supply. You live or die by it. When you live as a gatherer, you live by a whim of nature. If there's no food, you die. When you begin to store up food, you can defy nature and survive a drought. You then have the power to control life, the knowledge of life or death, or good and evil. So the tasting of the apple must have meant that Adam and Eve experimented with agriculture, and in doing so, they defied the God of nature. It's a warning. It's saying that the primitive life of hunting, gathering, and herding was more in accord with nature's way than is agriculture. Clark dove deep into the issue, but I didn't consider it all that important at the time. I couldn't see how when people started farming after the end of the Ice Age, it had been such a bad thing. After all, it brought us modern society and science. Clark, however, was totally certain that agriculture and what he called the organized ones were responsible for the coming death of the earth. The book, The Prophet's Way.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Happy Friday, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you, TGIF. Oh, this just breaking from the New Yorker. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, just called Donald Trump to tell the president that he was, quote, the most innocent person ever, end quote. Trump told this reporter. It was just the middle of the afternoon, and he just picked up the phone to say how innocent I was, Trump said. He said I was the most innocent person he'd ever come across, and maybe in history. He'd been over all the evidence, and that he and his staff would spend hours just looking at each other in amazement at how unbelievably innocent I was, Trump said. Right. It goes on from there. You can guess. It's Andy Borowitz in the New Yorker. It's brilliant. Yeah, he's so innocent. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday, so anything that you would like to talk about, feel free to give us a shout at 202-808-9925. But I've got a few stories here that I would like to share with you. For example, we have, one of the things that the vast majority of Americans, I would bet 99% of Americans who don't watch this program or listen to this program, don't understand is how CEOs and senior executives get insanely rich. And I'm talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, how they get insanely rich with stock buybacks in publicly traded companies. And just a real quick recap. I've done this, a couple of times here, but I don't think it can be said enough because it takes a while for people to really get it. Say you've got a company that is worth $1 billion and has 1 million shares outstanding, 1 million shares of stock for a company worth $1 billion. Okay, so each share of stock is worth $100. Now, there's different ways you value companies and, price to earnings ratios and percentage of sales and all that kind of stuff. But set all that aside for the moment. Let's just say there has been a valuation. This company's worth $1 billion. It's got 1 million shares. Therefore, every share is worth $100, if I'm doing my math right? Or no, every share would be worth $1,000. Because $1 billion is 1,000 million. Right, okay. So every share is worth $1,000. Now, let's say you're the CEO of the company, and your company made, let's say, for example, hang on, I have an actual real number for you. Let's say your company, in this case, it was $2.5 billion last year. Well, we can't use that example because we've only got $1 billion company. So let's say your company made $300 million in profits. And your company is a bank. I want to talk specifically about banks. Now, that $300 billion could add to the value of the company. It could be, well, if you're a bank, you could use that $300 billion to lend, it's now money in the bank at the bank, right? It's profit. So the bank could roll that money back into its operating capital, and it could lend out 10 times that, $3 billion worth of money. It could, it could literally invigorate the economy. However, because the senior executives are compensated with stock options, and the way a stock option works is, say I work at this company, the shares are selling for $1,000 a share right now. As part of my compensation, I get the deal that I can take stock options anytime during this year, and then I can turn them in anytime next year and sell them and only pay a maximum 25% income tax because it's a capital gain, right? Or 20% income tax because it's capital gain. So it's like super good money. So what I do is I instruct my company, instead of lending out $3 billion based on that $300 million of capital, I instruct my company to take that $300 million and buy back shares. Now there's 1 million shares out there. It's worth $1 billion, so 300 million. So we're buying back about 1/3 of the shares of the company. What does that do? It raises the stock price by about 1/3. So that $100 share of stock is now selling for, 100 plus 1/3 of 100, $130 or $1,300 a share. So then I take my stock options that I got at $1,000 a share and I sell them at $1,300 a share. I make a $300 profit on every stock certificate I've got, and say I get, 1 million of them a year. So, you can, or 1,000. Anyhow, you get how it works. A CEO of a bank has a choice. When the bank makes a profit, they can either use that profit to stimulate the economy by doing what banks are supposed to do, which is lend money out to people, or they can take that profit, buy back shares from the company, have the company retire shares from the marketplace, reduce the total number of shares in circulation, which raises the value of all those shares, and then the executives cash in the shares and put the money in their own pocket. So basically, the CEO of, and this is true of any company in America, and this is a game that every single, as far as I know, every publicly traded company that I've looked at is playing. This is the new way to make money in America for the CEO class. They have their company do share buybacks, which inflates the value of their stock options. So they walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars. But what the company does doesn't grow, doesn't expand, doesn't help the economy, doesn't hire new people. If it's a bank, doesn't lend more money to people. It basically screws everybody in America except the CEOs and the senior executives and the major stockholders. Now, this is all a result of changes in tax law during the Reagan era. But to give you a clear, frighteningly clear example of this, this comes from a fellow by the name of Thomas Hoenig, H-O-E-N-I-G. I'm not sure exactly how he pronounces it, but if he were pronouncing it, the German would be Hoenig. It's probably Honig or something like that. Anyhow, he was the vice chair of is the vice chair of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation right now. He's the number 2 guy at the FDIC. Before that, he used to be on the Fed. And he sent a letter to the Senate Banking Committee Chairman, Mike Crapo, and the committee's senior Democrat, Sherrod Brown. And Reuters is reporting on this. And in his letter, he pointed out that the 10 largest banks in America took 100% of their profits, and instead of using that money as additional capital that the bank has that it can use to loan money against, simply bought back shares and inflated the paychecks of their CEOs. The worst was J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon's bank. They made $2.5 billion last year, used it all for share buybacks. This is all, by the way, according to an article on Wolf Street. Howling about business, finance, and money is the subtitle. It's by Wolf Richter, R-I-C-H-T-E-R. The headline is Mega Banks Blow 100% of Earnings on Share Buybacks and Dividends, Crimp Lending, Constrain Economy. That's the headline. And he noted JP Morgan Chase, $2.5 billion, Bank of America, $2.25 billion, Wells Fargo, $1.9 billion, Citigroup, $1.8 billion, Goldman Sachs, $894 billion, Morgan Stanley, $832 billion, U.S. Bank Corp, $450 billion, PNC Financial Services, $371 billion, TD Group U.S. Holdings, $353 billion, Capital One Financial, $349 billion, a total of $11,819 million. You with me so far? Excuse me, 11 trillion, $819 billion. Okay. Yeah, because 1,000 billion is a trillion. Okay, so $11 trillion. I mean, it's mind-boggling. This is from wolfstreet.com, based on the S&P Global Market Intelligence. They could have lended. They could have increased lending in the United States by $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And instead, they just passed that money out to their executives. They note in the article, Wolf Richter notes in the article, the CEO of the top bank on this list has been very vocal about plowing more of the bank's income into shares, buybacks, and dividends while pushing regulators to lower capital requirements. And when the guy who wrote this letter to Sherrod Brown, he was the president of the Kansas City Fed and a member of the Fed's policy-setting Federal Open Market Committee from 91 to 2011 through the financial crisis. JP Morgan Chase earned, and just looking at the first part of this year, JP Morgan Chase earned $26 billion over the, or excuse me, this is the last year. JP Morgan Chase earned $26 billion over the 4 quarters, but it plowed $27.6 billion, or 106% of its income into share buybacks and dividends. If it had retained that income, it could have raised its capital by that amount, and that would have been enough to make an additional $250 billion of loans under current capital rules. So, basically they can loan 10 times what they have in capital. Share buybacks alone amounted to $83 billion, not counting dividends. If banks were to retain this capital, instead of buying their own shares with it, they could have increased commercial and consumer loans by $741 billion. If they cut dividend payments some, they could have boosted their lending by over $1 trillion. These banks could have done what banks are chartered to do, which is help the economy. Instead, they made their executives richer. Something very, very wrong with that. There's a whole lot of other news here I want to get to. The Black Agenda Report is talking about how they're being censored along with a bunch of progressive websites by Google. I think this is interesting. I don't know quite what to make of it. The king of Saudi Arabia is about to murder a bunch of critics of the Saudi government. I want to get into that tonight. Starting tonight, Americans for Tax Reform noted that starting last night with the flipping of the West Virginia governorship, Mr. Justice has gone from being a Democrat to a Republican, Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia. With that, there are now 26 states that are Republican-controlled, which is 2 states short of ratifying a constitutional convention, 2 states more than they need to start a constitutional convention, to rewrite the Constitution, to make America safe for billionaires again. And what are Apple and Amazon up to with the Chinese? I mean, there's just a pile of news out there. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of things on your mind, too. So whatever you'd like to talk about, it's Anything Goes Friday. We will get to it. Anything from lizard people to Republicans, if you can tell the difference. And so we'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day as we continue through our program today here on Anything Goes Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls after this. Welcome back. Bill, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Hi. Oh, good afternoon.
Yeah.
I saw Ranesh Panunu last night on Larry King, and then again this morning on C-SPAN, walking his book on comparing Democrats to Nazis. I forget the title. But
who is this?
Ranesh Panunu?
I don't know who that is. Is he a hot new right-wing writer or something?
No, he's a right-wing, shill. Dinesh
D'Souza? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
the
Okay, I've debated Dinesh D'Souza a number of times on this show. He's a he's a right-wing fanatic. I'll give you that.
Well, the comparisons you make him are just incomprehensible.
Yeah, he's trying to do an Ann Coulter.
He's turning it around. What the Republicans are doing, he's trying to slam the Democrats for being like that.
Yeah, he's trying to be Ann Coulter. He's trying to say outrageous things, demonstrably, outrageous things, in order to get press on the theory that press will sell books. And it's not just a theory, by the way; it's true. And that's why Dinesh does that stuff. I mean,
and wasn't he indicted at one time?
He was convicted. I don't remember the crime. It was. I frankly don't remember what it was that he got in trouble for. But yeah, he got in trouble a while back, and he kind of got quiet for about a year, and then that went away, and now he's back.
Yeah, it does. All right, thanks a lot, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks a lot, Bill. Good to hear from you. Mina in St. Paul, Nebraska. Hey, Mina, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It was just reported in the Omaha World Herald, and there's been a lawsuit filed. The Nebraska State Patrol, before they hire any female cadets, the females are required to go through vaginal and rectal examinations by a doctor in Lincoln, and they do not require this of the men. Now,
wait a minute. Why do they have to go through these intrusive exams?
Well, when asked about it, they said, "Oh, well, this is to check for hernias." Well, they've checked with doctors, and doctors say this is not how you check for hernias.
No, it's not.
And there has been a lawsuit filed against it. So this
unless they're checking for hemorrhoids or something. I don't get it.
Or if they're pregnant.
Yeah.
One other thing quickly, there's a big Give the KXL a Boot march Sunday at 3:00 at the State Capitol building in Lincoln, Nebraska.
So this is KXL, Keystone XL Pipeline.
Yep.
And what is, I thought this was like done deal, there's still protest. Tell me about what's going on.
They have not received permission from the Public Service Commission for the pipeline.
Oh, interesting.
And those hearings will be Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Right. Huh.
And
okay.
So we've had something like 5 different hearings around the state.
Right.
Going from 9:00 in the morning until 6:00 at night.
Right.
And basically what we need to prove is that it's not in Nebraska's best interest to have the KXL go through. And of course, they're saying, well, it's going to bring money.
Right.
So we're still fighting it.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. Mina, good luck. Keep up the good fight. And thanks for the heads up on both of those things. I appreciate the call, and thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Andrew in Bothell, Washington. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
Sure. What's up?
I'm glad you brought up the issue of the stock buybacks with some of these banks, because another aspect that a lot of people don't know about or concern themselves with is a lot of these banks take federal loans at close to no interest and do the stock buybacks with them and make tons of money and then give us back our money after not making anything off of it to make their millions.
Right, and they're taking federal loans at less than 1% and loaning them back out to you and me on 27% credit cards, 6% mortgages.
Right. 8% student loans. It's
right.
absurd.
Yeah, they're making a pile of money. And this is why they're literally showing profits in the hundreds of billions, and
You know, it's mind-boggling. Banks are, you know, banking is supposed to be boring and predictable. It's supposed to lubricate the economy. It's not supposed to be the most profitable industry in America. And I'm not sure if it is the most profitable, but it's damn well, they're doing really good.
Yep.
So, yeah, excellent point, Andrew. Thank you for the call. Thank you for validating my perspective. I appreciate it. Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. What's up?
You know, I've been watching from January until now with this debate about health care.
Mm-hmm.
What behooves me about the health care is their study wanted to take health care from the average person that, by the way, Stan, last night I was watching the Virginia, whatever he calls it, and those people standing there don't know that if he takes health care, they're going to lose their health care. They might have a parent at home they have to take care of, or a child at home they have to take care of, or anything they have to take care of. And they're standing there cheering this guy that wants to take this away from them, and the Congress, too. I don't understand it. We pay for their health care, but we're not supposed to have it. It behooves me.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
no.
AARP is really bad at this because they advertise one of the worst healthcare companies in the United States is United Health right here in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's how AARP got to be so wealthy that their headquarters here in Washington, D.C. looks like you're walking into a Saudi palace. Yeah, it's you know, the whole thing is a scam. That's the bad news. The good news is I think Americans are waking up to it, that the banksters are running a scam. The bankster health insurance companies are running a scam on us. Company after company in America now has started their own banking division. You'll remember GM with GMAC.
Yeah.
And now, you know, half the electronics companies in America, oh, you want to buy something? We'll lease it to you. Yeah, we got a leasing company. It's a bank. And everybody's making money on money, and nobody's making money making things. And that's why the United States is in the pits. That's why we're doing as poorly as we are. Time.
Yeah, well, we're doing poorly as we are because for some strange reason, I have said and I have wondered, I have listened to people talk about Trump is doing this and Trump is doing that. I haven't seen him do anything but run his mouth.
Yeah.
And another thing that really bothers me on some of these, broadcast shows for the news, they have these people talking about, well, the people's don't care about the Russia thing. Yes, they do. Mm-hmm. They really, really do.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I am scared to death because we don't know what the heck is going on behind closed doors.
Well, this is why we need a 9/11 commission to look into what happened between Trump, the Russians, and anybody else, frankly. I think that when all this comes out, we're going to discover that it had a lot more to do with Trump doing money deals with billionaire oligarchs who happen to be Russians as opposed to the Russian government. But I could be, completely wrong, and I just would like the truth to come out. I have not seen, and I don't think any of us have seen the real serious details of this stuff, and that's what Robert Mueller's trying to uncover. So, stay tuned, as they say. Barbara, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right
back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls. Anything Goes Friday, plus this giant pile of news I got here with me. We're going to get through this today. Keith Ellison also might drop by later. Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Robert Draper's book, When the Tea Party Came to Town. And it was actually, the original title of this book when it first came out was called Do Not Ask What Good We Do. And this is the only book that tells the story of how the Republicans got together the night that Barack Obama was being inaugurated and decided that for the next 4 or 8 years, they were going to do everything they could to destroy our first black president's presidency. And so I'm reading from the prologue, and he's talking about how Frank Luntz had organized that dinner that I was just mentioning. He was very happy about that. The dinner tables were set in a square. This was at the Caucus Room restaurant in a private dining room. It was a little restaurant down at the corner of 9th and D Street. The dinner tables were set in a square at Luntz's request so that everyone could see each other and talk freely. He asked that Gingrich speak first. Gingrich was happy to oblige.
And, you know, it goes on through this. Pete Huckster said, so we're in the depths. And then we get right into it. They would take back that this was their plan. You know, what their party had done from 94 to 2000, what the Democrats had done from 2006 and 2008, the Republicans would want to do again. They would take back the House in November 2010. Then they would use the House as the Republicans' spear point to mortally wound President Obama in 2011. They would do this and retake the House and the Senate in 2012. They would do all this, but only if the American voter blessed them to do so. It made no sense they all agreed to attack Obama personally. He was too popular. It's got to be about ideas, said Eric Cantor. Democrats now controlled everything and were already with a monstrously priced economic stimulus package showing their true colors. Given time, they'd screw things up, as the GOP had. But, said Paul Ryan, everyone's got to stick together. Ryan, a 38-year-old Wisconsin congressman and numbers fetishist, whose shiny earnestness recalled an Ozzie and Harriet America. Ryan hated squabbling among conservatives, the paleos versus the neos, the socials against the moderates, and on for as long as he'd been on the Hill, which was most all of his adult life. Ryan had long sought to be the Republican Party's glue, pleading for adherence to principles and data. At times, he looked like the underfed, hollow-eyed child of alcoholic parents. Well, the only way we'll succeed is if we're united, Ryan told the others. If we tear ourselves apart, we're finished. But, he added, he liked what he was hearing now. Everyone at the table sounded like a genuine conservative. It was a place to start. If you act like you're the minority, you're going to stay in the minority, said Kevin McCarthy. We got to challenge them on every single bill and challenge them on every single campaign. That's Kevin McCarthy. Luntz viewed McCarthy as one of the Republican Party's emerging stars, an easygoing, unthreatening guy who understood that language and appearance mattered as much as substance. Nonetheless, the poller and media guru interjected a cautionary note. One of the worst political performances I've ever seen, he said, was when the Democrats took over the House in 2007 and Nancy Pelosi shut out the Republicans and everyone whined about it. If any of you behave that way, I'll go on TV and hold you accountable. Luntz tended to get carried away, but everyone knew he had a point. Senator John Kyle began to focus on immediate tactics. He pointed out that Tim Geithner, Obama's nominee to be Secretary of the Treasury, had failed to pay his Social Security and Medicare taxes during his 3-year employment at the International Monetary Fund. Kyle sat on the Senate Finance Committee, which would be conducting Geithner's confirmation hearings the next morning. The Arizona senator intended to go after the nominee. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the approach I should take, he said to the others. There was a pattern here, Gingrich pointed out. Charlie Rangel, the new House and Ways and Means Committee chairman, hadn't paid taxes on his rental property income in more than 2 decades. Randall and Geithner would be wielding more power over how taxpayer dollars would be spent than anyone else in America. And then there's the web, chimed in McCarthy. There are freshmen who accept campaign money from Rangel. They're caught in the web. McCarthy suggested that they waste no time smacking down the New Democrats for the tax ads. The dinner lasted nearly 4 hours. They parted company almost giddily. The Republicans had finally agreed on a way forward. Go after Geithner, and indeed Kyle did the next day. Would you answer my question rather than dancing around it, please? Show united and unyielding opposition to the president's policies. 8 days later, Minority Whip Cantor would hold the House Republicans to a unanimous no against Obama's economic stimulus plan. Begin attacking vulnerable Democrats on the airwaves. The first Democratic National Republican Congressional Committee attacks would run in fewer than 2 months. Win the spear point of the House in 2010. Jab Obama relentlessly in 2011. Win the White House and the Senate in 2012. You will remember this day, Newt Gingrich proclaimed to the others as they said goodbye. You'll remember this as the day the seeds of 2012 were sown. Well, not so much, but I'd say that this is when the seeds of 2016 were sown. Forgotten, or at least not discussed that night in the caucus room, was what had been sown in America by January 20th, 2009. That was the day the meeting happened, the day that President Obama was sworn into office. On that evening, while the ruling party celebrated in tuxedos and the minority party retrenched over steaks and red wine, U.S. unemployment rate had climbed to 7.6%, the highest such indicator of national misery in 18 years. Things could get much worse. Joblessness in America would exceed 8% the following month. By May 2009, the number would climb to 9.4%, and by October to 10.2%. And it goes on. It's a great book. Robert Draper, When the Tea Party Came to Town. Hartmann here with you. And Rialto55 over on Twitter says, Tom, can you please explain the difference between risk corridor payments and the insurance company payments that Trump says he'll withhold? Thank you. Yeah, real quickly, I'll do that, and then we'll pick up your phone calls. There were two big financial pieces. Well, there were many, but these two things that you're talking about, parts of Obamacare. With regard to the risk corridors, the insurance companies were asked to take on, millions of new customers and with no idea how sick or healthy they are, and at prices that were determined in advance, which is a prescription for possible disaster. Maybe not, but you just don't know. So Obamacare had this provision called the risk corridors in it that said that any company, any health insurance company that participates in good faith on the Obamacare exchanges, sets an appropriate price, everybody agrees this is good, yeah, thank you, you put it on there and you sell your insurance. At the end of the year, if that insurance company broke even or made a profit, great. If they lost money at that price, then, up to a certain amount of losing money, they could come to the federal government at the end of the year and document their losses. Say, hey, we lost, $1.3 billion last year, selling Obamacare on the exchanges, and the federal government would reimburse them for that $1.3 billion. So their risk is limited to the corridor, which is basically to zero, to not making a profit. So, with no downside risk, the insurance company said, sure, we'll jump into this enthusiastically and we'll keep prices down. So that's what Marco Rubio blew up in 2015 when he attached a piece of legislation that ended the risk corridor payments to an omnibus budget bill that got passed in 2015, became law in early 2016, and that's why you saw the 25% increases in Obamacare prices in some states, particularly those states that were Republican-run and therefore were not fully compliant with Obamacare. So that's the risk corridors. The payments that Trump is withholding is a whole different thing. And that is basically the other part of Obamacare is that, say the insurance policy for a family of four, in whatever, family of four in your state costs $1,000 a month. And if you're making over a certain amount of money, and I think it was like around $60 or $70 or maybe even $80,000 a year, something like that. It's a high end of the upper middle class. If you're making more than that, you're going to pay that $1,000 a month. But if you're only making $40,000 a year or $30,000 a year, which is kind of closer to the median individual income in the United States, household is around 50, but that is typically 2 or 3 workers. But say you're only making $30,000 a year, at that point the federal government says, that $1,000 a month policy, buy that, and we will cover, say, $400 a month of it. So it's only going to cost you $600 a month. And that balance, that additional $400, we will pay on your behalf directly to the insurance companies. And these are called there's an acronym for a 3-letter acronym, RSAs, RSCs, something like that, risk payment adjustments or risk cost adjustments or whatever they are. There's an acronym for it. And I should check our chat room because Sue is always on top of this stuff. But anyhow, so those payments have nothing to do with the risk corridors. That's the federal government subsidizing you if you're working but you're not making more than $50,000, $60,000 a year. That's the federal government subsidizing your insurance. And those payments are made to the insurance companies every month. And typically it's around $1 billion, $2 billion a month from what I've read in the papers, totaling maybe 10, 12, 15, $20 billion a year. Not a lot of money from the point of view of the federal government. I mean, it's like, 1 day of operation at the Pentagon sort of thing. But, or a couple days maybe at the most. So those are the payments that the federal government issues to the insurance companies every month to cover the Obamacare subsidies so that Obamacare is affordable to low-income working Americans. Not very low income, that's Medicaid, that's a whole other thing, but Medicaid, this is Obamacare. Now, because those payments are made by the Department of Health and Human Services,
or via the Department of Health and Human Services, which is an executive branch agency, the president has the power to say to the head of HHS, no, don't make those payments. Don't send that money out. And that's what he's been threatening to do. And if he does that, instantly all the insurance companies are thrown into a loss situation where they have to jack their prices up if they're going to survive. But they can only jack their prices up once a year. They have to submit these numbers in advance, and they go into effect, you know, every November when the new enrollment period happens. And that's the whole uncertainty issue. You see all these articles in the press about how the insurance companies are increasing their prices right now 10, 15, 20, 25, 30%. There's one insurance company in one state that's going up 40%. And when they were asked why, as I recall, it was a vice president of Blue Cross Blue Shield. He said, because of the uncertainty, because we don't know if Trump's actually going to pay us. And so we have to nail down a price at which we can at least break even if we're going to participate in this business. So if Trump were simply to come out and say, yeah, no problem, I'm going to honor the obligations that our government made in the law. If he was simply to say that, everything would be cool. Well, not everything. I mean, the risk corridor still is a big deal. It's, you know, it's hurt all of us. Marco Rubio damaged anybody who's getting Obamacare in his attempt to set up the destruction of Obamacare. And if you want to know the details of this, just Google Marco Rubio risk corridors, New York Times, and you can find the whole thing. Sue says finding lots of mentions of risk adjustment. I think they're called risk adjustment payments or cost CRAs or something like that. But anyhow, those payments. Thank you, Sue, for looking. I appreciate that. So anyhow, in answer to that Twitter questioner, that's the deal. So back to your calls. Al in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
First of all, I'd like to know how you handle this, how you manage to be on the radio every single day. And, I mean, do you ever just get the, you know, like, I don't want to do this again. This is sort of getting a little bit, you know what I mean? Just the continuity of having to be on the radio.
Al, I love what I'm doing. I really do. And every day there's something new and fascinating. And on those days when there isn't something new and fascinating, there's all kinds of stuff that's old and fascinating that I can, you know, bring people up to date on, whether it's, you know, whether it's how the Fed was put together or how this country was put together. I love what I'm doing. So I got no problem.
It's amazing. I mean, because, you know, for some reason, if I did what you did, I swear to God, I would get a little bit desensitized. I'd get a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Well,
it's just kind of like you do the same thing.
Then Al, let me give you some career advice. Don't become a talk show host.
No.
So anyhow, that's not what you called about, though, is it?
Yeah. There's like how many water main distribution? How many distribution water lines are there in the United States? I mean,
I have no clue.
Well, there's like an annual. What is it? 240,000 annual water main breaks a year. And they're saying it's going to get worse. And
I don't know, but it is getting worse.
Why aren't the mayors setting up some kind of a targeted tax system in each state or city? I mean, like a targeted tax system that would, you know, that the money would go to that specific coffer to fund infrastructure.
Right.
I have not seen. I mean, I've seen a little bit of, you know, like the mayor of what's his name, the mayor of Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, the mayor of Lansing, Michigan, actually, Verge Bonero did the best job on this. Here's the situation. In those states that are under complete Republican control, all these Republicans have signed Grover Norquist's pledge.
They can't override what the mayors do in their cities.
I certainly can, actually. And you've got states writing preemption laws preventing mayors from raising taxes, preventing mayors from raising minimum wages, preventing mayors from doing a lot of things. But to the water mains, I remember like it was several years back, Bernie was on the show and he was talking about how he was at a town in Vermont where they were digging up the road because there had been a water main break. And when they got down there, they found that the pipe, I guess maybe it wasn't when they got down there, it was when they looked through the city records. But in any case, the pipe that had broken had been laid in 1863 in the middle of the Civil War.
Oh, the whole infrastructure in itself is so primitive.
Yeah.
Not just the water mains, but the electrical grid.
Right. So just
the tunnels, the levees.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we used to keep up with this, by the way. We had modern infrastructure in the United States pretty much every year from the 1700s, the late 1700s, well, even from the early 1700s. We had modern infrastructure at the state of the art for the time from then until 1980. It was when Reagan came in and the Republicans right across the board said, okay, no more taxes, no more government spending. Government is not the solution to our problems. It is the cause of the problems. It is the problem. Stop the government from spending money and look around you. You know, it's like most of our streets, many of our buildings, our schools, our hospitals, so much stuff has not been built since the 1980s, has not even been maintained. And so we've got this situation. Yesterday I was talking about how in Chicago, this massive number of water mains are lead, and the distribution lines, rather, are lead pipe. In fact, up until the 70s, as I recall, or 1980s, it was mandated. Right. And so what Virg Bonero, the mayor of Lansing, Michigan, did is they had developed this brand new technology because the problem is if you want to stop the lead pipe from, say, the street into your house, you had to dig up the whole yard and all the way down to the foundation of the house to pull the pipe out and put a new pipe in. And what somebody came up with this idea, you can get semi-flexible copper pipe. It's not flexible, but it will bend without crimping.
It's polyvinyl chloride tubing.
Yeah, exactly. And so what they're doing is they're finding the water line at the street. They're running this copper line through the inside of this lead water line all the way down to the house. When it comes out at the house, they've broken the line there inside the house, and the copper pops out, and they reattach the house to the copper, and they get all the lead out of the system without taking it out of the ground. It's cheap. And they've done this all over Lansing, Michigan to solve the lead problem. They are not doing that in Flint. They are not doing that in Chicago. They're not, to the best of my knowledge, they're not doing that anywhere else, and they really need to be. But you've got these Republicans who are convinced that any amount of money spent. Now, Virg Bonero, the Lansing, Michigan mayor, is one of the best progressive Democrats, frankly, in the country. Assuming the Virg is still the mayor, I haven't checked in a while. But it's not being done, and it should be. I agree with you. We've got a serious infrastructure problem. We got a D+ on our infrastructure from the American Society of Engineers. It's terrible, and it all goes back to Reaganomics. Al, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. We'll be back in just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Patrick in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller.
Thank you.
As you know, we have lots going on in the state right now.
Yeah.
Right to Work for Less goes into effect the end of this month, and we have petitions circulating on the ballot next November to repeat it, to put it on the ballot next November. I've been informed that we already have enough signatures, but the smear campaigns by the Chambers of Commerce, big business, our governor, and all the Republicans have started, so we got our work cut out for us.
Yep.
And you know about the travel advisory the NAACP issued?
Yeah, we covered it yesterday on the show.
Okay, good. Well, I wanted to put a plug in for a candidate we have running in a special House election next Tuesday, August 8th. Mm-hmm. Michaela Skelton is running for the vacant seat in 50th House District. She's a state Bernie delegate, by the way. She's the most progressive candidate we have in the state at this time, and if we ever hope to turn things around in this state, we have to start electing progressive candidates, and Michaela would be an excellent start.
What's her website?
MichaelaSkelton.com.
How do you spell it?
Skelton.
How do you spell Michaela?
MichaelaSkelton.com.
Okay, great.
Right.
Patrick, I hope a few people, I hope a lot of people catch that and go check it out. Thank you very much for the call. Appreciate it. Riley in Silverthorne, Colorado. Hey, Riley, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good. What's up?
I just wanted to talk about Democrats and gun control for just a second.
Sure.
Here's the way I see it. We have three options. I think guns should be everywhere, personally. And I just like to get my cock and fling around like a helicopter back and forth, you know?
I beg your pardon? Oh, you just dumped him. Okay. What, he swore on the air or something? Okay. Louise, X that guy out and block him from calling us again. Brenton in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Brenton, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
I wanted to get your opinion. I've been researching some stuff as far as the economy goes. I know that, every single month it seems like we keep getting these numbers as far as the stock market's going up and up and up. But I was doing some research yesterday, and I looked, and they were showing like the unemployment rates are including like those that work a few hours a week. So to me, I don't really consider that like a job. Home ownership is at like a 60-year low because a lot of people now are renting homes.
Well, also because foreign investors are buying homes, have been, since the housing crash, have been buying massive amounts of housing stock all over the United States and turning them into rental homes. So
that's exactly what's going on here in Detroit, too, because there are a lot of people, they lost their homes to foreclosure as far as like property tax.
Right.
And then investors are coming in and buying them up, and then they rented it back out to the same homeowners.
That's
so
right. It's the same thing that happened to farms in the 1980s.
And then they're saying mortgage debt is at its lowest rate. Household debt is worse than it was pre-2008.
Yep.
So I want to know from you, which way do you think the economy is going? Is there any indicators that we should look for as far as, it may collapse or something like that? Because I keep seeing all this positive stuff, but we don't get this side of it where indicators are saying a totally different thing.
Yeah. On CNBC, I believe it was this morning, it was at the top of Drudge this morning, Alan Greenspan said, beware, there's a crash coming. It's going to be a big one, and it will give no warning. It's just going to happen. And I'm inclined to agree with that because so much of this economy is bubblegum and glue holding things together, or bubblegum and baling wire or whatever the cliche is. So, Brenton, you might want to check out my book, Crash of 2016, but beyond that, I don't have to speak. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jonathan in Stewartsville, New Jersey. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind?
Not too much. I have a question on my mind that I'm kind of polling around the various talk shows on both sides of the aisle. Do you think that the position of Supreme Court Justice should be an elected position?
No.
Okay, I can see your argument there, because then we'd have these people acting like politicians, just like states with judicial elections.
Yeah, I don't think any judges should be elected, frankly, and the reason why is because the electoral process has been completely corrupted by Buckley and Citizens United. That said, though, our politicians have been equally corrupted by Buckley and Citizens United, and the result of that is we've got a lot of politicians in power who are not serving the people. They're serving corporate interests or billionaire interests or their own interests. And I would make that claim to all of the Republican Party and a fraction of the Democratic Party. And so even appointed judges right now are problematic. This is why Mitch McConnell, blocked I think well over 100 judgeship appointments during the Obama administration. He did not want Democrats to appoint any judges because they might be honest judges. He wanted to wait until he had a Republican president, and including the Supreme Court, by the way, with Merrick Garland. And now, replacing him with Neil Gorsuch, he wanted to wait until he had a Republican president who could put in corrupt judges who would always rule in favor of the big corporations, in favor of the billionaires, and in those cases where it had to do with state power versus human power, in favor of the NSA or the police or whatever it may be. And so we've got in my opinion, we've got a judicial crisis. We've got a justice system crisis in this country. And we've got a major political crisis. As Jimmy Carter said on this program 3 years ago, we're not a democracy anymore. We're an oligarchy, and we need to recognize that and do something about it. And in my mind, that means getting the oligarchs out of politics, which means reversing these Supreme Court decisions that allowed the oligarchs in. Those same oligarchs, by the way, who had been whining and dining and paying Anthony Scalia and Clarence Thomas, which just disgusts me beyond description. Jonathan, thank you for the call. Eric in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you doing today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that as a retired member of this service, I wanted to say happy 227th to the United States Coast Guard.
Oh,
it's
wow.
227th today. Alexander Hamilton set him up as the Revenue Cutter, Lighthouse, and Life Saving Corps, August 4th of 1790.
Wow. We were a brand new country then. That was the
Yes, we were a
third year of the
country.
Washington
You're exactly
administration.
right. The one thing I wanted to say, and I've talked to Mark about this in the morning, he said, wow, that's wild. Back in the 80s, my father was there was nobody above him except the director of the National Park Service. He was the chief scientist for the National Park Service.
Mm-hmm.
And he and H.W. Bush worked together on some environmental problems in North Carolina. Even on my website, not my website, but my Twitter, I have a picture of them shaking hands and stuff.
Sure, this was back before the Republicans had been completely captured by
my dad
polluting
was
billionaires.
Democrat. My dad was Democrat.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to get people together. And I'll tell you what the really bad thing was, and this is my opinion. When we had Obama, the Republicans just did not like him because, honestly, they saw a black man that was smarter than them.
Yep.
In my opinion.
I agree.
Now we have a total loony, as far as I'm concerned, in the White House. And I can see it coming about, but we need to get back to, hey, we can work together to get things right.
That would be a good idea. The problem is, how do you work together with somebody who is committed to an agenda that is antithetical to the interests of your country?
You're exactly right. And just like H.W. and Dad, and H.W. was the VP at that time.
Right.
They worked on it about 1984.
Well, H.W.
was 1984.
Yeah, H.W. came from that generation that understood, civic pride and country above self and not.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to praise H.W. He was
veteran, except he landed at Normandy. So
yeah.
It was that generation of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And we need to get that back. We need to get it taught to our children a lot more, and then we can work together. But right now, we're in a bind.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all, Eric, and that also shows. I mean, H.W. Bush, also Bush Sr., was also the guy who, when Ronald Reagan floated his idea of tax cuts pay for themselves, and the more the rich make, the more it'll stimulate the economy because it all trickles down. It was George Herbert Walker Bush who called that voodoo economics in the primary in the 1980 election, the Republican primary, and repeatedly called it voodoo economics, ridiculed Reagan over that. And then when he became president, actually raised taxes, which, angered his base, but arguably reduced our deficit somewhat. Eric, thanks for the call. Yeah, happy birthday to the Coast Guard, and sad to see you go to any kind of, bipartisan rationality, at least on the part of the Republican Party. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price, too, for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never, ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is, irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten, too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side. The referee's blowing the whistle for you. The arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thom Hartmann here with you, and I am super pleased to have with us on the line Congressman Keith Ellison, brilliantly representing the 5th District of Minnesota, but also the Deputy Director of the DNC. His website, ellison.house.org and democrats.org. You can tweet him at Keith Ellison or at DNC. Congressman, welcome back.
Hey, man, good to be with you, always.
It is.
How's it going? Thanks for laying that out on climate change. I mean, this is a horrifying thing, and the problem is that we know the science. We got people like the author you were quoting who know the science. What we don't have is the political will, and that is the thing that we've got to set our sights on. Yeah,
you're referencing when our commercial stations are doing the news at the top of the hour, we play a book report for 5 minutes for our non-commercial stations, and they were listening to that. And you're talking about, I was reading a book that I'd written about climate change, and that, yeah, it's important stuff. Hey, I see that you've got 2 pieces here I've got printed out in front of me. One is from the Minnesota Post, 10 years before bridge collapse, we still need to raise public investment in the nation's infrastructure. And the other was want to see, from the Washington Post, want to see who Republicans care about, check their anti-poor budget. Would you care to riff on either or both of those?
Well, you know, they're kind of related, aren't they? The fact is the federal government should do everything it can to boost good jobs. And but that's just part of it. Actually, investing in our nation's infrastructure not only boosts employment, but it also saves lives. About 11 years ago, the Minnesota I-35 bridge collapsed into the Mississippi River. It certainly was a call to action for us in Minnesota, but it was a call to action for the whole country because, you know, you got bridges in critical stages all over the country. And not only that, water systems. I mean, look at Flint. What is that but an infrastructure disaster? And if we had the right and proper investment, you could not only put people to work, you could make things safer for people. We lost 13 people when the bridge collapsed. 100 people fell into the Mississippi River. You know, the people who survived had spinal fractures. Horrifying. You know, you fall 65 feet from a bridge. You know, that might give you a little bit of phobia. And so we'll never forget it, but that's what that's all about. You know, we've got to invest in infrastructure, not only put people to work, but also save lives. On the other one, look, Republicans are going to get up and declare that they're for the working people. They're going to get up there and declare that they're for working Americans and that they care so much. Fine. Let's see who really means it. What's the best place to find out? The budget, right? Pull out the budget. You show me your budget, and I'll show you what you care about. And they care about war making in the police state, and we care about infrastructure, investing in people, education, and addressing climate. And that's very simple, you know.
Yeah.
The progressive budget, the people's budget, is something we're incredibly proud of. Even though I'm not even the co-chair anymore, I'm still an active member in the Progressive Caucus. We're ably led by Mark Pocan and Raul Grijalva, and but our people's budget is something we hold up as a budget that people can get behind.
Yeah, and it's important stuff. It's great stuff. And you're going to be at Netroots Nation this weekend?
Yeah, man, I'm going to be at Netroots Nation. We're going to be talking about the future of our country. We're going to be talking about America's role in the world, and how is it that we can move forward given this Trump and Trumpism. And again, it's not about one person doing bad things in the White House. It's the whole environment that he creates. And how do we envision another kind of America where people are supported, included, where our government actually is concerned about working people, and where we're standing up for the rights of working people. And that's really kind of an alternative vision we're going to put forward. We believe we're right.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to be real clear at Netroots.
And if I may respectfully add, given what Robert Mueller's up to, we might want to start including Mike Pence in every denunciation of Donald Trump, because he's every bit as bad and in many ways worse, particularly when it comes to women's issues and religion. And he may well be the president of the United States soon.
Well, I agree 100%. Mike Pence, I served with Mike Pence. There's nothing good coming from Mike Pence. You know, he had to jump on that VP ticket because he did such a lousy job as governor of Indiana. Yeah. People were on to him. He was going to have a lot of trouble. But, you know, Mike Pence is much more smooth than Donald Trump and knows how to work the levers of Congress better than Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you, I have no evidence for this, but just something in my gut tells me that Mike Pence was always the insurance policy for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so, you know, here we are, you know. But, you know, I just want to just say the next issue coming up that we all have to be focused on is this tax thing. You know, they are going to try to starve the government and dramatically reduce services, everything from basic research for your mom's Parkinson's to, you know, food and to the safety network that people rely on when, you know, times are tough. They're gonna go straight at it, and by the way, they're not going to ever tolerate an increase in taxes, although that's exactly what we need. And we need to really start, Tom, and I'd love your take on this. We need to stop making tax a dirty word. I mean, the Republicans act like tax is the worst thing ever, and you can never even talk about raising them. But the truth is, taxes are just the dues we pay to live in a civilized society.
Yes.
And I believe to whom much is given, much is expected. And I don't see how a hedge fund manager should pay a lower tax rate than the secretary, which is exactly what's going on now. And I don't see why Wall Street can expect us to bail them out, but they don't want to even toss in with a financial transactions tax to help us out, a high roller tax, which would make a lot of sense. You know, and I think there should be a polluter welfare. There should be a polluter tax. If you pollute, you pay more.
Yep.
And me and Bernie Sanders got an End Polluter Welfare Act bill that strips away the subsidies for these guys.
That's great. My take on it is I agree with Keith Ellison. You know, you said it.
We are one.
You said it really, 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 really well. You want to take some phone calls?
Yeah, man. Let's talk.
Okay, let's hit. Let me hit this break, and we'll pick up phone calls just on the other side of it. We are talking today with Keith Ellison. He's with us for the half hour. Congressman Keith Ellison, representing the 5th District of Minnesota, the Deputy Director of the DNC, Democrats.org, Ellison.house.org, and you can tweet him at Keith Ellison. We'll be right back with your calls for Congressman Ellison.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Keith Ellison with us right after the break. welcome back. Bill, watching Free Speech TV in Fredericksburg, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's a pleasure speaking with you both.
you
The
doing,
question
man?
that I had was around affirmative action. And one of the things that's puzzled me, when you take a look at the argument against affirmative action, it's about people not being qualified for certain positions. And the problem that comes to mind is, if you take a look at the cabinet, Donald Trump's cabinet, Betsy DeVos has never stepped foot in a classroom, yet she's the Secretary of Education. And you take a look at Rick Perry, a C student, and he's at the head of the Department of Energy. Now, by no stretch of the imagination can these people be considered qualified. So how do you square that argument that affirmative action needs to be done away with? I'm really curious about that.
Well, neither one of us have a good answer for you. I mean, we believe that we want to create an America where everybody feels they have an opportunity. But while you're on the subject, let's talk about Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner's father dropped several $1 million in Harvard. There's articles out there that you should read about how Jared was not thought to be quote unquote Harvard material when he got out of high school. This is according to his teachers, not me. And yet, Daddy drops $2 million, and all of a sudden he's going there. His teachers reported being surprised.
Right.
So you take something like legacy. Why isn't that affirmative action for people who already have tremendous privilege? You take something, and then, let's be honest, we had affirmative action before affirmative action. It was affirmative action for white people,
Yep.
I mean, my mother, when she went to college at Xavier University in New Orleans, she could never dream of going to LSU at that time. She just couldn't do it. They wouldn't let her in. Her birth certificate said Negro on it, and that was all they needed to know. So, look, I believe that one of the most important things working people of America need to do is to create solidarity around race. One of the ways we can do it is to just say, 250 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, 300 years of state-sponsored suppression of African Americans, maybe we should make sure some of them have a shot. That's all it's saying. We've only had about 60 years of any other system other than state-sponsored and sanctioned suppression of blacks and browns. So is it the worst thing in the world? And by the way, here's the thing about Sessions. Sessions is no big fan of working-class white people. He never has been. All he's doing right now, is trying to make white people believe that it is black people and brown working-class people who are threatening their livelihood, when this is not anywhere close to being true. Why don't they go talk to this guy, Steve Mnuchin, the foreclosure king, who literally threw 30,000 people out of their homes in foreclosure. Foreclosure caused more problems to a neighborhood than a whole lot of problems. So I guess that's where I'm coming from on it. This is a thing designed to divide people. We should be about inclusion and solidarity, and that's where I stand on it.
Amen. Yeah. Well said. Congressman Keith Ellison taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ellison right after this.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Congressman Keith Ellison on the line taking your calls for about the next, 7-8 minutes, something like that. Marlon in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Marlon, you're on the air with Congressman Ellison.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Keith.
Hey.
I think that they're going to shove this net neutrality down our throats, or blowing up of net neutrality, no matter what we say or do. I was wondering if a way to combat that would be for governorships, local townships, whatever, to say to these companies, you cannot provide your service in our community or state or whatever, unless if you operate under the rules of net neutrality, as a way of combating that.
Or have municipally owned ones like in Chattanooga. Congressman, your thoughts?
Right. You know what, Tom? I like the idea, but the main thing I like about it is that you're thinking creatively about what we're going to do. I mean, here's my point. You have a great idea. There are other great ones, just like what's going on in Chattanooga. But the real point is that we can protect net neutrality if we fight hard to do it, if we put in a maximal effort, if we reach out all across this country and say, people, we got to stand together and be active. I like your creative idea. Let's get 25 more great ideas about how we protect net neutrality, because your essential point is correct. They're coming after it because this is a way for them to restrict access to speech and communication. And never doubt that it was government money, it was public investment that started the Internet. It was not these big multinational Internet service providers. And also never doubt that, look, the Internet and coding was started by, like, people on the political left who were trying to create space. It has been monetized and commercialized by some entities. We've got to push back on this. Let me tell you, this Internet issue you raised is as key as the healthcare one. It is exactly the fight we need to be in right now.
Right. Plus, they're still using public rights-of-way to get the Internet, through across the country, into our homes. It's all public rights-of-way, so arguably it should be regulatable. It's, it's not unlike telephones. So, good one.
Absolutely. Hey, if I could just say this, because I know you're a great reader, Tom, and that's one of the many things I love about your show and you.
Thank you.
There's a book called Move Fast, and Break Things. How Facebook, Google, and Amazon cornered culture and undermined democracy, by a guy named Jonathan Taplin. It's about fighting market concentration and how we need to revive antitrust legislation. So just for folks looking for a book on this, how Move Fast and Break Things, how Facebook, Google, and Amazon cornered culture and undermined democracy, Jonathan Taplin.
Great.
Not a bad guy to get on your show.
I just wrote it down. I'm going to have to check it out. Sam in Englewood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Ellison.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Keith. Thanks for taking the call. My question is regarding what is Democrats' long-term strategy to win the hearts and minds of people who are supporting Trump at the moment, voting against their interests. I can see a scenario where this whole investigation just says, well, all he had done was some sort of a financial, deal that is, a little gray. I can see a situation where the supporters will essentially just give him a pat on the hand and say, he didn't know any better. He was just a businessman. So I'm wondering, how can Democrats going into the long-term sort of planning understand how to present this information and how to really impress upon these people that they're essentially voting against their interests and against the country?
Look, the long-term game of the Democratic Party is to make politics about people, politics about community, politics about building relationships between neighbors, a government which is of, by, and for the people. That's the goal. And that means that we've got to go to every door. We've got to go to every senior center, every VFW hall, every house of worship for anybody and those that don't go. And we've got to really engage our people. We've got to say that things like data analytics and modeling might be tools, but they're no replacement for building a coherent relationship between one person and another. And our messaging needs to start with the idea that you need to make popular what is necessary, which is building community, as opposed to try to figure out what's popular by just pandering to people based on a poll. And that is where we got to go with this. Politics is about people, not polls. It's about community. It's about relationship. And we need to go to people and listen to people and build relationship with them in order to have a government which is of, by, and for the people. That is my concept. If somebody has a better one, let me know.
I think that's brilliant. David in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Ellison.
Wow, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have an idea that I think is fundamental to all the issues we discuss, because it all comes down to the ballot. And I think that you need Chuck Schumer to have a little bit of a backbone, but with the debt ceiling increase coming up, I don't think we should default. I think we should only allow it to be raised maybe a month at a time, but make it contingent on restoring the Voting Rights Act, and also adding some legislation that requires paper ballots with eyeball counts that need to be certified on every election. And the only way to make politicians responsive to the voter is to make sure the votes are counted.
Congressman?
Good ideas. Let's keep talking. I think that it's, I love the fact that he's thinking about what we need to do to restore the Voting Rights Act. Another good book out there, Give Us the Ballot but I can't call his name. Ira, oh man. I'm having a mental block, but it's a great book called Give Us the Ballot, and by a brilliant young writer.
I know who it is, too, and I can't remember his name either.
He's an awesome dude, man. Somebody on there knows.
Something like a Chernatov or something. Maybe I'm mixing him up with somebody else. Anyway,
anyway.
Give us the ballot. So, Congressman, we have just about a minute left, which isn't really enough time to give somebody an opportunity to ask a question and you give an answer. So, Ari Berman wrote the book. I'm sorry.
Ari Berman.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my man.
And in the
mental block.
Yeah, in the half minute or so we have left, what should we be watching in the news, and what should we be doing when we call our members of Congress over the next week?
You got to make sure that we have a fair, that this tax debate goes right. You got to tax the wealthiest people who have benefited the most from deregulation and tax cuts over the last 50 years. You cannot let them get away with starving the government. That's the name of the game for the next period. Number two, congratulations on the healthcare fight. Use that as inspiration for what you might be able to do next. Third, this internet fight is about suppressing and dividing people. They want to make it more expensive, so get involved in the internet fight. We can win it. It's our airwaves anyway, and those are the fights that we got to be in. Get ready for your Labor Day picnic. Celebrate Labor on Labor Day. It's coming up in a few weeks. Don't let Labor go by without celebrating Labor. You want to figure out a good example? The workers, the UAW workers trying to organize the Nissan plant.
You're listening to the
Thom
Thom Hartmann Program.
Check
Call 202-808-9925.
Brilliantly said. Congressman Keith Ellison, thanks so much for being with us, sir.
Anytime, bud.
Good talking with you. And you can tweet him at Keith Ellison, ellison.house.org. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, which, even though it's 2017, this book is actually more relevant than ever before, and I think one of my most important books. This is from the introduction. I was around 10 years old, a total science fiction junkie. Amazing Stories, a pulp magazine of science fiction short stories, commentary, and science news arrived every month, and that meant that on that day, all homework and play were forgotten. These were some of the most brilliant stories written for a penny a word by people such as Robert Silverberg, Jack Vance, Poul Anderson, and Frank Herbert, who would go on to become the biggest names in the field of fantasy and sci-fi. And one particular story haunted me for years. 8 years later, when the first men landed on the moon, that story brought back to me as if I'd read it the day before. In the story, a group of astronauts are finally, for the first time, going to blast off from Earth and circle the moon. It had never been done, and because our moon doesn't rotate on its axis like we do relative to the sun, but instead circles us with a single side always facing us, nobody had ever seen the dark backside of the moon.
These men would be the first in human history to do so. The rocket roared to life from the launch pad, the astronauts chatting with mission control as they hurtled toward the moon. When they got close enough, they let the moon's light gravity grab their space capsule, and with a few deft rocket thrusts, they put themselves into orbit around it. They were unbelievably excited, as were the NASA folks on the ground, chattering back and forth about what they hoped and expected to see. Was the dark side of the moon identical to the front, or was it more mountainous? Might it be frozen water there, since it has a different exposure to the sun? Might there even be wreckage there from ancient astronauts or something else exotic like that? Anything was possible. As the astronauts began their turn around the backside of the moon, Mission Control told them they'd lose communication because the giant mass of the moon would block their signals, so they prepared for radio silence. But as they made the turn, they could still hear Mission Control. What they saw as they glimpsed behind the face of the moon, we see on full nights, brought an audible gasp from all of them. One picked up the microphone to radio the ground and tell the horrible story. Another knocked the microphone from his hand with a warning gesture. They continued to circle around the backside of the moon, and the view became clearer and even more ever more undeniable. Should we report it? A debate, virtually a fistfight, broke out in the capsule. What would it mean for Earthlings? What if nobody believed them? What if they were quarantined upon returning and imprisoned or sent to a mental hospital? I remember what they saw that was so horrifying to the astronauts. The backside of the moon was missing. They were looking into a concave half ball of the front side of the moon, which was made of canvas stretched over an elaborate superstructure of 2x4s nailed together like the scaffolds that held up roller coasters from that era. This science fiction story from my childhood also tells the story of America today on the verge of the crash. On the surface, everything seems okay. Our politicians still talk about promise, hope, and change, and we applaud and feel inspired. The world still uses our money. We still have the strongest military in the world, and our standard of living is still far better than the third world's, though worse than most of the developed worlds. We're still by far the wealthiest nation in the world with too many billionaires to count. We still have civility in the streets. We have reality TV and fancy cars. We still vote, at least those with the driver's license and birth certificate. As long as you don't look too closely at our nation, things seem under control. The United States looks whole. The economically, militarily, and scientifically superior United States, as we've come to know it in the past 80 years, seems intact, not only for the whole world to see, but from afar, but also for those of us who live here. But when you go back around the dark backside of our nation, you see the shocking truth. There you see a nation whose core fundamentals have been hollowed out, replaced by balsa wood stilts, and wrapped in a frayed canvas of nationalism and bravado, a cloak similar to that worn by nearly every great superpower that has ever existed on the planet just before its own eventual collapse. Unlike the canvas moon, the United States was once full and complete. Many of us still have memories of that era of the middle class through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But today, that middle class, like the canvas moon, has been hollowed out. Middle-class neighborhoods still exist across America, but now they're teetering on stilts of mortgage and credit card debt. As then Labor Secretary Robert Reich testified before Congress in 1994, the net national savings rate, he said, which was at a relatively robust 8.2% of GDP during the 1970s, has dropped to a barely visible 1.8% in the early 1990s. That was just a decade and a half into the Reagan Revolution. Today, it's far worse. The AP headline from February 11, 2009 says it all. Americans have negative savings rate. Hollowed out, too, is our nation's democracy. The spectacle of national elections confronts us every other year, but behind the pomp and circumstance, our democracy has been corroded into an oligarchy as billionaires finance their own political candidates and corporate-funded think tanks do the work once reserved for elected officials in writing and passing legislation. Stripped clean and hollowed out, the United States is more vulnerable today than it's ever been, including during the Great Depression and Civil War. Those fortified pillars that supported a booming middle class are stolen, and without them, America teeters on the verge of the next great crash. Ultimately, this book is a story of how America was dragged into this crash. We are standing today at the edge of the fourth great crash and war in American history. The previous three, each about 80 years apart, were gut-wrenching in their horror and bloodshed, but they ultimately transformed America in ways that made this a greater and more egalitarian nation. The book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America, What We Can Do to Stop It.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is interesting. This happened just a little bit before we went on the air. Lisa Murkowski, the woman that Trump tried to bully in the White House and, trashed in Twitter and whatnot, the Republican senator from Alaska. Lisa Murkowski, when Mitch McConnell was gaveling the Senate into recess, put forward a motion calling for, let's see, how many was it? 9, I think it was. Yeah, 9 what are called pro forma sessions. Now, a pro forma session of the Senate is where somebody walks up to the speaker's desk, or the leader's desk or whatever it's called. I think they call him the president, actually, the president of the Senate, the president pro tem, the stand-in, the temporary president. They walk up to the desk and they bang the gavel down and they say, the Senate is brought to order. And then they bang the gavel down again and say, the Senate is adjourned. I mean, it's there may be a few more flowery words in there to make it all legal, but that's basically all they do. And the way that the recess rules are written, going back to the Constitution and everything that's changed or everything that's been codified since then, is that if the recess runs more than 3 days, then the president can make recess appointments. The recess appointment clause in the Constitution goes back to the days when the Congress only met part-time. They only met for a month or so every year, and the rest of the time the president was basically running the government. And if he had, if he needed a judge or filled, if he needed a senator filled, if he needed a Supreme Court justice, whatever it may be, rather than calling Congress back in and having people spend days on horseback to get back to Washington, D.C., he'd simply make the appointment, and it would be good until the next time Congress convened, and then they could certify it, ratify it, or they could, refute it and do their own thing. So it's an anachronistic thing to begin with. It's out of date and unnecessary, but it's there. And if the Senate goes into recess more than 3 days, then the president could fire Jeff Sessions and replace him with anybody he damn well pleases, who might be able to then fire Bob Mueller and disband the grand jury. Although it's going to be, I think, a lot more difficult to disband the grand jury. But I'm not a federal prosecutor. I don't know the details on that. But this was the big fear, was that Trump would use a recess to fire and replace Jeff Sessions. So Lisa Murkowski asked Mitch McConnell, as he was closing up the Senate for the summer, asked him if he would consent to 9 pro forma sessions, one every 3 days, where she or one of her colleagues or friends would simply go in, bang that gavel, say those words, and thus magically prevent Trump from firing Sessions. Well, he can't prevent him from firing him, but prevent him from replacing him with anybody. The only person he could replace him with would be Rod Rosenstein, who's the number 2 guy in the Department of Justice, who is the guy who wrote the letter firing Comey. So, it's like he's kind of compromised. He may have to recuse himself. And in any case, it's not going to be what Trump wants. So she has gotten her, I don't know if it's revenge or if it's just the right thing to do, but good on Lisa Murkowski. Sonia in Redding, California. Hey, Sonia, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was calling about the voting systems.
Voting systems, yes.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the future of our voting, and like the caller before, I think we need to have paper ballots. But I also think it needs to be put to the legislature starting now, because I'm really concerned about the 2018 and 2020 elections.
Yes, we have highly hackable systems, from the systems that control who's registered and who legally can vote to the voting systems themselves. They're highly hackable, as they demonstrated at DEF CON 25 just a couple of days ago. And we played the video of that here on this show. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that's what I was wondering. I don't know how long it takes to actually get it through the legislature, but I think it's crucial that we start now.
It could take 2 days if the legislature was committed to it. But given that the Republicans like the situation, I mean, if you look at the states that went heavily for voting machines, like Georgia, where they don't even have paper trails on the voting machines, you look at those states, and in those states, the polls, the exit polls, consistently show Democrats winning, and the electronic voting machines consistently show Republicans winning. This is called redshift, and the redshift goes as large as 7 points in some cases. and it's happening almost exclusively in Republican states or swing states, and that have electronic voting machines. And it's something that we need to do something about. Bernie Sanders has been calling for paper ballots on this program. He did it for 11 years, starting 13 years ago. And I think a lot of Democrats are with you. I mean, Canada uses paper. Most of Europe, I think all of Europe uses paper. Pretty much everybody uses paper. And it's a very, very straightforward thing. I'm with you, Sonia. I totally agree. Thank you. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Too bad I didn't get on with Keith Ellison, but I wanted to thank him for coming to Portland and addressing kind of our people's area. And I was able to ask him a question about retirement security for workers. And speaking of that, our local congressman, Congressman Schrader, had a town hall last night, and he was shocked and surprised that 25% of Oregonians are on Medicaid. And I wanted to bring up the point to Congressman Ellison that, Congress doesn't seem, since they're all millionaires, they don't seem to understand that 51% of American workers make less than $30,000 a year.
Right.
So there is no retirement security, and there is no retirement for a vast majority of Americans. I mean, and I wanted to ask, what are the Democrats going to do to, one, improve wages, and two, improve retirement access and security?
Yeah. I mean, there have been a lot of calls from the Democrats, and if you go back to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, their progressive budget, to strengthen Social Security, to change the rules around pensions, to undo what Reagan did, where corporations can book pensions as assets and require them to book them as liabilities, so that when a company gets sold to a vulture capitalist, they can't simply steal a pension, which has been happening since the 80s, since Reagan changed that rule. And those are two very simple, straightforward pieces. The other is, they gave Reagan invented 401ks and IRAs and all this stuff as a way of trying to weaken Social Security and move people out of Social Security and into Wall Street. This was a gift to the banks. And now we find that, the average person who starts putting money in a 401k at the age of 20 will have given banks over $100,000 in fees by the time they retire, whereas if it had gone into Social Security, it would have been, nothing in fees. In fact, there would be profit. And so, all of those things I think are really important, and those are good starting points. Lowell, thanks for the call. Mike in Denver. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for your show.
Thank you.
So I've got to get back to the health care thing because it's not hard to understand the Republicans' view, but it is hard to understand the Democrats' view. The risk corridor payments, isn't that corporate welfare? Shouldn't Democrats be railing against that? And if so, isn't that a way for Democrats and for the Progressive Caucus to put a stake in the heart of privatized medicine?
Arguably. I mean, if people had a good understanding of all the various moving pieces of Obamacare, they would realize that a lot of Obamacare is all about protecting the insurance companies. The reason I'd say it's not corporate welfare is because it was limited to 10 years. On the assumption that within a 10-year period, the insurance companies and the marketplace would all settle down. Now, keep in mind, this was all before John Roberts in the Supreme Court changed Obamacare so that individual states could pull out of the Medicaid expansion, and also states had the ability to allow insurance companies to sell subprime products in their states. Iowa did that fairly aggressively, and as a result of that, young, healthy people are buying these subprime products instead of buying insurance on the Obamacare exchanges, and so the exchange is collapsing in Iowa right now. California did not allow that. Obamacare is doing really well in California. But because those risk corridors were limited to 10 years, it was really more of the how do we work out the balancing act of this and make sure that nobody gets badly injured. If it went beyond 10 years, I would argue, yeah, it was terrible corporate welfare. But frankly, I'm of the opinion that we should replace the entire thing with single payer and let these health insurance companies, downsize dramatically to where they're simply, as in most other developed countries in the world, that allow private health insurance, that they're simply offering high-end gold-plated policies to very high-income individuals, and let everybody else go on Medicare for all. It just seems to make sense. I mean, this is just common sense stuff. So, yeah, I get what you're saying, Mike, and I think it's, and particularly now that the risk corridors are gone, thanks to Marco Rubio, we could always point back to that. But I think it's important that the failures of Obamacare be clearly laid at the feet of the Republican sabotage that's been going on for 2 years, aggressively going on for 2 years. And now Trump is trying to make it even worse. Mike, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, and we're going to check in with Talk Media News in a few minutes. Welcome back. Rick, watching Free Speech TV in Manton, Michigan. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thanks a lot for doing what you do, and I appreciate you having Keith Ellison on, too. I guess my question is, and I want to get your comment on this, and I would have liked to have gotten Keith Ellison's comment also, but I turned on the TV this morning, and of course, we've been talking about the Republicans and how they feed a lot of crap through television and other media for their own purpose. And I turned on the TV this morning, and I seen an advertisement, and this stuff even happens with the Obamacare stuff that's going on, but I seen like a political advertisement about tax reform. Mm-hmm. We need tax reform.
Right.
And I paused the TV and I looked at, well, who is doing this? Because the tax reform that's going through, as Keith touched on, is all about tax cuts for the rich. It turns out this particular ad was taken out by Business Roundtable Incorporated.
That's the 100. That's the 100 richest companies in America.
Excuse me?
That's the 100 largest companies in America.
Yeah, exactly. And they've been in business since 1972, I think it was. And they're all about the demise of worker rights, demise of unions, and the list goes on. And now they're funding this tax form for the rich.
Right.
And I wanted to really ask Keith, when is the Democrats going to start putting some counter ads on television to advise people about this? And
well, keep in mind, Rick, this is not the Republicans running this ad. This is a private for-profit business corporation that has access to, I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars represented by the Business Roundtable's members. I doubt that they'd put trillions on the table for advertising, but they certainly have the ability to. And I don't know of any, citizens organization that probably can even afford a national 60-second ad.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask Keith Ellison why it is that the Democrats can't stand up and maybe counter this type of stuff that we see on television.
They are. They're speaking out against it all the time. It's just that the corporate media doesn't pick them up because NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, Fox, they all want a corporate tax break too.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the bottom line. By the way, you said you thanked me for putting Keith on the program. We have, and this has been our policy since we started this show, there is an open invitation to any member of Congress, the House or the Senate, to come on this program as much as once a week and take calls, unfiltered calls from our listeners. The only thing we screen out for is obscenity and drunkenness. If somebody calls and they're clearly intoxicated, or if they're screaming obscenities at our call screener, they don't get through. But otherwise, that's it. Any topic. And any politician who is willing to do that is welcome to do that on this show anytime they want. And the only 3 politicians who have taken me up on that offer in 14 years have been Bernie Sanders, Mark Pocan, and Keith Ellison. God bless them. Oh, and Sherrod Brown has as well. It's been a long time since he's done it, but Sherrod Brown's done that also. Oh, and Joe Crowley did it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, the head of the Democratic Party. So there you go. Anyhow, Rick, thanks a lot for the call. But be sure to thank them. I mean, if you appreciate Keith Ellison being on here, it wasn't me, it was him. So tweet. Welcome back. Let's check in with Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. Patrick, welcome back.
Hey, how are you?
Great. So what's going on in the world today?
Well, obviously we're all kind of still scrambling from yesterday's news about Bob Mueller expanding or summoning a grand jury into the investigation into sort of Trump world and Russia writ large. I think in terms of what exactly you can read into that, I think a couple things. One, obviously I think despite the sort of drip of stories we get about Trump team and Russia and whether or not there was any collusion there or not, I think everyone obviously has been waiting for Bob Mueller to kind of have the final say. And I think if anyone's going to speak with any authority and have any real political impact, it would be him. And I think that what this shows is a couple of things. First is that obviously he is not slowing things down, and obviously he thinks he has enough. I think that people who sort of know this process know that you wouldn't summon a grand jury if you were sort of putting a bow on things, and if you also didn't think that you had a whole lot there.
Right. The whole point of the grand jury is to take something that really looks stinky and lift it up thoroughly and look around to see if what you think is there is actually there. And but you have to find the what you think is there to start out with, and so that's a bad sign for Trump.
It is, and I think that also grand juries have a lower threshold than a regular jury, just because the standard of evidence is a little lower there, and so I think that chances are, knowing the way grand juries work, and also the fact that Bob Mueller's no idiot, and he's a guy who's been around for a while. My gut says that the grand jury will probably at least allow this to proceed.
Plus, when you testify before a grand jury, you can't bring your lawyer. And if you lie, as Bill Clinton did before a grand jury, you can go to jail. Or Clinton lost his law license and got impeached for lying. It's pretty draconian. So people tend to tell the truth, which may not be the very best thing for Trump world these days.
That's right, and I think that Trump's only pushback on this would to sort of go through what's a sort of convoluted process of firing Mueller. But in fact, he's this just shows you how sort of politics is a long game. I think because he hasn't made much of an entreaty towards Congress and made many allies, and in fact, even as they're leaving D.C. This week to head home for the August recess, he really kicks them on their way out by noting how relations between the United States and Russia are really low. And who's to blame for that? The Congress. And not only that, the Republicans in Congress, which is among many bizarre Donald Trump tweets, that one's one of the more bizarre ones. And so
he's burning his own bridges.
That's exactly right. And now, as a result, to tie it into the Mueller story, there's now competing bipartisan Senate bills that were introduced yesterday that actually are seeking to protect Bob Mueller from any sort of repercussions from the White House. In other words, if Trump does the only thing he really has in his power to do, they're hoping that this bill would really shield Mueller. And it really sort of shows how Bob Mueller's a guy who's played the Washington game fairly sophisticated and carefully, and it shows in these efforts from folks in Capitol Hill. And Donald Trump is someone who hasn't. And obviously, now I think Congress is making him know that, were you to actually try to stop this, that even people within his own party, would try to stop him. So this just continues to never look good for the Trump administration. And I think we're just kind of waiting to see what Bob Mueller knows.
Yeah. Okay. So what else is up?
Well, obviously Congress is heading back, so things are going to slow down a little bit, but we're kind of taking a look at what we can expect once everybody gets back. It's been a pretty...
When do they get back?
I want to say September 7th.
So basically the whole month of August is blown out.
Yes, well, and let's not forget that one, I believe it was a tweet from Donald Trump saying that Congress should not leave town until they've done something about health care. I guess. Right.
Well, isn't he taking a 17-day vacation starting tonight?
He certainly is. He's heading up to New Jersey.
This is the guy who trashed Obama every time he took a day off? Every time he played golf? I'd never play golf.
I mean, that's one of the more beautiful things about Twitter is every time Trump does something, people go back and comb through his archives and find that he's doing the very thing that he criticized Obama from doing a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Yeah, so Trump's vacation numbers and golfing numbers are rivaling Obama's. But when they do all get back, obviously, having not really done a whole lot on really anything, I think the top priority for Republicans, well, first of all, is going to be the debt ceiling and government funding bills that Republicans, I believe, have 12 days when they get back to sort of solve those things. And they will need Democrats to pass those two bills. And so that's going to be a really tricky test of leadership, especially in the wake of the healthcare debacle where they obviously got no Democratic support whatsoever, and it paid horribly for them. But obviously there are many Republicans who do not want to work together with Democrats on that at all. Once they solve those, we hope, the big effort's going to be on the tax code and tax reform. And Paul Ryan actually saying last night in Wisconsin that he does predict that Republicans will have an easier time cutting corporate taxes and sort of simplifying the tax code for individuals than they did with health care. So despite what happened, I think Paul Ryan thinks that this is something that they can pull off.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and one other thing that they'll be trying to do when they get back is of course, immigration reform. John McCain, to the chagrin of many in his own party, does want to revive that topic when he returns, even putting it up there right alongside tax reform as a key issue for Republicans to pick up.
I think, maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but I've lived on 2 continents and I've worked on 3, and every country that I've worked in order to get the equivalent of a green card, I had to go through, basically proving my worth, essentially, and Canada does this, Australia does it, the European countries do it. When George Bush was elected president in 2000, I looked into emigrating to Norway. Good Lord, what you've got to do to get into Norway is unbelievable. I was picking that because my grandfather and grandmother are from Norway. I'm not convinced that the idea of changing the requirements for green cards is a bad idea. I think that some pieces of this might be a very good idea. I am concerned about cutting the quota from 1 million down to 500,000. But it seems to me like this might be something where Democrats could work with Republicans, although everything has become so partisan in this state, in this town. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Patrick?
Well, I think you're right. I think that the real question is going to be if they do sort of trim the number or put some sort of quota in, what's the criteria going to be for that? I mean, this is what the White House had a hard time defending this week in the White House press room was when Steve Miller came on and said that speaking English might be one of those requirements. Well, that gets really tricky because how do you sort of allocate English-speaking people from the various countries from which they emigrate? So you're right; it could have some consensus, but I think the specifics is where it'll get really thorny.
Yeah, I agree. And also, it looks like they want to dial back on spouses and relatives coming into the country, and I have a problem with that. Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick.
You bet. Take care.
Good talking with you. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not. But fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin, and prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe, end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes.
This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of news stories here I wanted to go through and share with you, and then we'll get back to Anything Goes Friday and your calls. Jeff Sessions last night gave a speech about how he is tripling the number of investigations into leaks. Principally, you know, obviously the White House is freaked out about this. Yesterday was the day that the transcripts of Donald Trump's discussions with Mexican President Peña Nieto and Australian President Malcolm Turnbull were both leaked. And, you know, where did those come from? Who got them? You'll recall President Obama prosecuted more leakers than than all other presidents in the history of the United States combined. And clearly Trump wants to do even more than that. I don't think this is a good thing, and I think that we need a Whistleblower Protection Act that protects both leakers and reporters who accept and publish those leaks when those leaks can be demonstrated to be in the public interest. And, you know, it concerns me tremendously that this is happening. This looks to me like the beginning of the death of the media. You know, the media will simply become lapdogs. I mean, not to say that they're not already to a large extent. You watch the Sunday shows, Republican senators come on, they lie through their teeth and nobody challenges them. I mean, they're just now starting to challenge Trump on all his lies. But when Jeff Sessions says this, he says, one of the things we are doing is reviewing the policies affecting media subpoenas. Now, when you're subpoenaed, if they impanel a grand jury and you're subpoenaed, you know, basically, you've got no choice. You're going to testify. If they grant you immunity, you are going to testify or you are going to jail. And this is scary stuff. I am concerned about, as a member of the media and as a consumer of the media, and we're all consumers of the media, we should all be, frankly, frightened by this kind of behavior coming out of the White House. I was opposed to doing it. I was opposed to it when the Obama administration was doing it. I'm opposed to it when the Trump administration is doing it. This is not a partisan issue. This is a government transparency issue. And government transparency is something that this country was built on. It's the core. It's a core animating principle for the United States. I mentioned earlier Black Agenda Report. The Black Agenda Report, Bruce Dixon is the editor, and he wrote an op-ed or an article you can find over there at Black Agenda Report titled, "It's Getting Real, Google Censors the Left and Us." And he writes, conclusive evidence exists that Google is suppressing public access to socialist and left-wing websites, almost certainly including the Black Agenda Report. In fact, Black Agenda Report is by all accounts the only black-owned, run, and oriented left website so targeted. And then he goes through all the other ones that are not. He says it's just a matter of time. Convincing evidence has emerged that Google is actively suppressing public access. Now, here's how it happened. In the wake of Hillary Clinton losing the election, and actually it was even before that. This was in September. In the wake of all the so-called fake news stories that were rolling out toward the end of last year, a group called the First Draft Coalition, which was Google, Facebook, Twitter, New York Times, Washington Post, BuzzFeed News, Agence France-Presse, and CNN, got together and they said, let's put together a list of websites that we will never source from. We're not, these websites are known to carry fake news. And, in principle, it sounds like a good idea. You put InfoWars on there, Alex Jones's site, or Breitbart. I mean, there's, or the clearly fake news ones, the ones out of the old Eastern European states and stuff like that. Where what was that kid in was it Moldova or whatever, wherever he was, who was making $10,000 a month running fake news stories that that he was selling advertising on. Say that again. No, it wasn't Serbia. It was one of the M countries. But in any case. So you can understand the logic behind it, but what happened was they came up with a list of crazy far-right sites, and then it was like, okay, we've got to have balance. This is this phony balance thing, right? It's like if you're going to have somebody saying there's global warming, you got to have a climate science denier on, even though 100% of climate scientists who don't work for fossil fuel companies agree climate change is real and it's being caused by people. It's not even 97% anymore. It's 100%. Of peer-reviewed, published climate scientists who do not work for fossil fuel industries. So what? Macedonia. Thank you, Chris. Chris looks it up while I'm talking. Brilliant. But so they came up with a bunch of right-wing sites that they're not going to list because they're actively engaging in fake news, and some just BS sites, some nonsense sites that they're going to block. But then it was like, well, we got to block a bunch of left-wing sites too, right? So this is what they blocked. And how much their traffic dropped, according to this article by Ben Dixon or Bruce Dixon, excuse me, in Black Agenda Report. The World Socialist website fell by 67%. Alternet.org fell by 63%. I publish an Alternet, pretty much every week. It's a brilliant site, one of my favorites. Globalresearch.ca, that's a Canadian site, fell by 62%. Consortium News fell by 47%. Socialist Worker by 47%. Media Matters. Media Matters for America. David Brock's site. I mean, you don't get more kind of mainstream Democratic Party than Media Matters. Most of what they do is point out the lies on Fox. They were listed as a fake news source. Their traffic fell by 42% on Google. This is all, Google simply no longer indexing these sites, or at least many of the articles on these sites. Common Dreams fell by 37%. International Viewpoint, 36%. Democracy Now! Fell 36%. Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman's site, probably the best news site in the United States, fell by 36%. WikiLeaks fell by 30%. Truth Out, another site that I write for that has great content. They've got 2 of my books on there you can read for free. Rebooting the American Dream and Unequal Protection. Truth Out fell by 25%. Counterpunch fell by 21%. And The Intercept fell by 19%. These are not fake news sites. There's something really wrong here. And finally, the last thing I wanted to bring up, just to toss on the table, and then we can talk about it for the rest of the hour. 2 stories back to back. Number 1, the Washington Post. Emily Rohala on August 2nd wrote an article titled, Apple, Amazon Help China Curb the Use of Anti-Censorship Tools. Now, that sounds like a good thing until you realize that it is curb anti, it's a double negative, right? You could rewrite that headline as Amazon and Apple helped China censor the internet. And what they're doing is they're pulling VPNs. VPNs are virtual private networks. With a VPN on, your computer talks to another computer someplace else, typically in another country, over an encrypted line, so that so your ISP can't listen in. And so the Chinese government can't listen in. So if you've got if you've got a VPN on your iPhone or on your computer, and you're in China, and the other end of that is in Los Angeles, then all China sees is gibberish. They have no idea what websites you're visiting, and you're actually connected to an internet portal in Los Angeles, not in China, even though you're in China. This is how VPN works. And there's all kinds of VPN products in the Apple Store. And Amazon sells VPN products. Not anymore in China, though. They are bowing down and kissing the butts of the Chinese dictators. Meanwhile, Benjamin Haas in Hong Kong, now this was back on the 10th of July. This story's been sitting on my desk now for 3 weeks. I'm waiting to dig through the pile here. We finally got down to it. A Chinese activist who was arrested after investigating working conditions at a factory making Ivanka Trump-branded shoes says he believes the connection to the U.S. president's daughter led to his detention. This is amazing. The guy's name is Hua Haifeng, and he told The Guardian, first of all, he's a labor activist. He goes around and inspects factories, and he's exposed a lot of dirty dealing and bad employment, employer practices, maltreatment, mistreatment of employees in China, in factories across China. And when he went to this particular factory, he had no idea that they were making Ivanka Trump stuff. So he thought it was just another, hey, I'm going to expose another factory, and something that he does. And the Chinese tolerate that. They've let him get away with it because, they're getting a lot of flack from their employees, from workers in China. They're trying to raise standards of living. This is the direction ultimately that they have to go anyway. And they know it. The government knows it. But this was Ivanka Trump stuff. And they want things from Donald. They in particular don't want him putting tariffs on Chinese-made goods. So he shows up at this factory and he gets dragged off. He gets arrested. He says, when I was first taken away by the police, I couldn't understand why I was being arrested. But once I was released and reconnected with the outside world, I think it was probably because of the factory's connection to Ivanka. He didn't know about Ivanka's connection to this factory until after he got out of being arrested and looked it up on the internet. He said, before I arrived at the factory, I didn't even know Ivanka had a clothing brand, and it wasn't until I was released I knew this brand was related to the daughter of the U.S. president. Benjamin Haas in Hong Kong writes for The Guardian. He adds, the allegations echo similar charges of low wages and anti-union intimidation The Guardian founded a factory making Ivanka Trump products in Indonesia. So the Chinese cracking down. Hua said his 7-year-old daughter cried when she saw him for the first time since he came out of detention. My family missed me. He said this was very scary for them. This guy getting arrested because how dare he look into the conditions, the workers' conditions at the factory making Ivanka Trump stuff. So the question, if we're supporting Apple and Amazon in supporting China oppressing their people, what has happened to American values? What has happened to American companies promoting American values? American companies helping promote American values around the world. Have we just said to hell with all that? It's all about the money? Apparently we have, and I think that's wrong.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. Welcome back. John in Crawfordville, Florida. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Well, hi, Tom. It's a pleasure to be on your program. I wanted to go ahead and agree with everything you've just said about the, compromising the Internet. I do a lot of research on the Internet, and it's crucial that I'm at least have the freedom to go to the sites that I want to. But my main question was earlier you were talking about the need to protect whistleblowers and America relying on the truth. My question is to the entire nation of America, when is it a national interest for us not to know the truth about certain subjects? Now, I understand there's certain areas like maybe, corporate copyrights or perhaps agents in other countries seeking to, seek down terrorists.
I think a better example might be, when we were building the bomb, the Manhattan Project was super secret because we didn't want Hitler to know that we were doing this, or Tojo for that matter.
Yes, and I agree. And there are certain, but they should be rare occasions. It seems like to me this invasion of money and greed has made it so that so many things now are kept secret from the American people, supposedly for our own good.
Right.
My opinion is that only makes us more uninformed, more uninterested, and more likely to be damaged by not knowing what the truth of the situation is.
Yeah, I think it was during the Clinton presidency. It might have been Jimmy Carter, but I'm pretty sure it was Bill Clinton. Actually had an initiative to reduce the amount of stuff that was classified secret or top secret, because just absurd stuff was being classified just because it happened to fall into the purview of an agency that often classifies things. And there's all kinds of problems around classified material because it has to be treated in a very different way than unclassified material, and it's much more expensive to treat it that way and to save it and store it and archive it and et cetera, et cetera. And so it was sort of, partly a just, practical and financial decision, and also, kind of why are we stupidly doing this? But I agree with you. I would take it a step beyond that and not just say, let's make sure that the stuff that's classified is actually stuff that has to do with, quote, national security, but rather which of the things that have to do with national security are the things that we really need to keep from the American people. And I also agree with you that they should be few and far between, and Congress should be well briefed on all of them because they are our representatives. And I realize that there are, committees in Congress that have top secret clearances and that do routinely see things that the rest of us don't see and don't know about. But I'm guessing that what Congress sees is probably less than 1/100% of all the classified material, or even the classified projects that are happening.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in my opinion, this is just leading to further ignorance, even between agencies, as to what they are doing.
Well, it also prevents us from developing a national consensus on topics of importance to Americans.
Absolutely. For example, my main thing that just keeps eating me is a story that we seem to just be brushing over. You hear it every now and then, and that was the extensive use of cross-check during the last election.
Yes, it's huge. The other thing, here's one that flips me out, and this is the use of stingray devices. These man-in-the-middle things that pretend that they're cell towers that can, read all the data on your phone. There's 17 of them here in Washington, D.C. You never even know when you're being hit by them, and they're all secret.
On April 15th,
Thom Hartmann here with the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or you can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. There I am. Ha! Okay. One other story I wanted to share with you real quickly, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. this is outrageous. This is an editorial in today's New York Times, or yesterday's New York Times opinion page by the editorial board itself. The headline, "An ally is set to execute critics. Will Mr. Trump be silent?" And it starts out by the editorial board. Mujtaba El-Swaikat was a bright 17-year-old student on his way to visit Western Michigan University when he was arrested at King Fahd Airport in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2012. Since then, he has been in Saudi custody, subject to torture, including beatings so severe his shoulder was broken, in order to extract confessions that sealed his fate, condemned to death, likely by beheading. Saudi Arabia's Supreme Court has upheld his death sentence, as well as those of 13 other Saudi citizens tried with him, including a disabled man and 2 who were juveniles when they were sentenced, after a mass trial that made a mockery of international standards of due process. Now, the only person who can prevent these barbarous executions is King Salman, who must ratify the death sentences. As is the case with many members of Saudi Arabia's Shiite minority condemned to death in recent years, Mr. Swaikat's crime was attending political protests in the heady months following the Arab Spring in 2011. And so this is a kid who simply showed up at a protest calling for democracy in Saudi Arabia. Calling for democracy in Saudi Arabia can cause you to have your head cut off. Let me say that again. Calling for democracy in public in Saudi Arabia can lead to you having your head cut off. This is Donald Trump's best bud. This is our best bud. This is the country that sent us 17 hijackers on 9/11. This is the country that we've been buying oil from forever. This is the country that has been exporting Wahhabism, the most radical form of Sunni Islam that preaches violence and jihad all over the world. Saudi Arabia, where the core of this stuff is coming from, and we constantly let them do this. It's a sovereign nation. It's not like we have a lot of control over them, but we should reward them by selling them billions of dollars worth of weapons and supporting their brutal war in Yemen right now. 600,000 people starving to death. Massive cases of I believe it's not malaria. It's what is it? Vibrato, cholera. Cholera vibrato is the name of the bacteria. 600,000 cases, 500,000 cases of cholera. I mean, you children looking like stick figures right now in Yemen. There are children dying as we speak, and the Saudis have been dropping cluster bombs and all kinds of American-made munitions on them, and we're just sitting here oblivious to it all. No news coverage, no nothing. I mean, if Ireland was doing this, if Russia was doing this, if Iran was doing this, we would be all over it. I mean, how many countries behead people who call for democracy? Saudi Arabia and China, they don't behead you, but they imprison you, and maybe they'll sell your kidneys. I mean, and these are our buddies. We really need a serious rethink of our entire foreign policy shtick here in the United States. Because what we're doing is, in so many ways, so antithetical to the core values on which this country was founded, or at least that we espoused at our founding, and that we should be following.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls. Anything goes Friday. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. I'm on page 109. These are the title of the chapter is Myths About Democracy in America. Myth. Left to themselves, people would drain the treasury. Reality. They haven't. To the contrary, conservative administrations have. Conservatives are aggressively promoting the idea that democracy is doomed and should be replaced by an aristocracy of large corporations who already largely control the Republican Party because, they say, people are fundamentally lazy and will drain the treasury simply voting themselves unlimited welfare benefits. This is a slur that is particularly directed against people of color by conservatives in the United States. This myth is especially ironic since the irresponsible fiscal policies of conservative presidents Reagan, George H.W., and George W. Bush mostly created today's budget deficits. Numerous conservative websites promote this myth by quoting Alexander Fraser Tytler, 1747 to 1813, a Scottish politician and historian who allegedly wrote in 1776, quote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. End of quote. Given that USA is over 200 years old, that's a rather scary quote. The problem is that Lord Tytler had his facts wrong. At the time he wrote the statement, if he did, Bartlesby simply lists it as unverified, only one democracy had existed for more than a few decades, Athens. And its end had nothing whatsoever to do with people voting themselves benefits from the public treasury. In 1776, when the quote was supposedly written, the world's second democracy was just being birthed and wouldn't take full form for another decade, so it seems on its face nonsensical. Similarly, Tytler's description of the way nations with representative governments would fail is accurate only if you're counting those democracies that are corrupted by the wealthy and powerful to the point that they've become sham democracies and, in fact, have become feudal aristocracies where the feudal lords are the wealthy individuals or the powerful corporations. History and the experience of the world's mature democracy shows us clearly that when a majority of people participate in democracy, even simply by voting for the representatives, they don't vote to steal the wealth of the nation from themselves. Another myth, liberal democratic policies are socialism. The reality, democracy has nothing to do with collective ownership. Conservative commentators love to roll out this myth when people in a democratic society agree to tax themselves in order to provide for the common good. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting that we should, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. It says, in fact, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines socialism as any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, B, a system of condition of society which the stages of production are owned and controlled by the state. So then it goes back to the book. No rational liberal or progressive in America is suggesting any of these things. Have you heard a conservative complain about our socialist police forces or about our socialist fire departments? Of course not. But they're paid for by taxes, or our socialist roads, or our socialist air traffic control system, or best of all, our socialist military with its strict rules that the highest paid may not make more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid, its comprehensive free healthcare system, and its subsidized housing. Indeed, the military might qualify as the most socialist institution in our government, though I doubt they'd like to be called that by conservatives or anyone else. So why do conservatives incessantly apply this label to programs that don't match the definition? It's because the word has such a negative reputation. Socialist and communist nations have, for the most part, been conspicuous failures, killing tens of millions of dissenters in the process. This is as using the word socialist as in the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics context. Modern democracy is not collective ownership, but a political system in which the voice of the people is not only heard in government, but is the government. The means of production and distribution of goods and services, except those having to do with the commons, like fire and police, should continue to be privately owned. But just as certainly, we the people must take back ownership of our government. This will remove us from Benito Mussolini's vision of a corporate state and leave us in the radical middle place of a constitutionally limited democratic republic, a modern liberal democracy. Myth. Free markets are nature's way of making the winner fit and strong. It's Darwin. Reality. Darwin's method led to more diversity, not less. Conservative activists love to complain about the dangers associated with the concentrated power of government. Indeed, anybody who's ever spent time in the third world, in dictatorships like the old Soviet Union, or in a repressive communist state like modern-day China, and I've worked in all three, understands how dangerous concentrated and unrestrained government power can be. The real problem, however, arises when there are gross inequalities in the size and difference and power of different entities in a culture.
This is true whether the giant party is a powerful government, a powerful corporation, or a vastly powerful individual. In any case, ordinary people can find themselves in trouble without a thing they can do about it, no matter how great the injustice. And it goes on from there. The book is What Would Jefferson Do? A Return to Democracy. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, something I had slipped my notice. I've mentioned in the past, people come on the program and I say, yeah, you're talking to 3 million people. Talkers Magazine, which is the Bible of the talk media industry, their website is talkers.com, run by Michael Harrison, who's just is a walking encyclopedia about this industry, has been around this industry for a long time. Lists the audience size. They go through all the Arbitron ratings and everything else, and look at the audience size. Now, this does not include our free speech TV audience, so this is just radio. And they're listing Limbaugh at 14 million, Hannity at 13.5 million, Michael Savage at 11 million, Glenn Beck at 10 million, Mark Levin at 10 million, Laura Ingraham at 8 million, Hugh Hewitt at 6.5 million, Thom Hartmann at 6.25 million. Not too shabby. So, the last one I remember was maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, the last time I really looked at these numbers. And at that time, my recollection was we were around 3 million. Now we're at 6.25 million. So not too shabby. Number 9 talk show host in America this year. Again, this is great. Anyhow, Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, forgive my bragging here, Rich. Rich, what's on your mind today?
Bragging is about things that may not necessarily be yours. You have asked for nothing in those statements. You are awesome, Thom Hartmann.
Thank you, Rich. So what's on your mind?
Vacuum. Well, I'm here to help fight the vacuum of national ignorance as well. And there is an idea that is referred to as modern monetary theory.
Oh yeah, we've had Stephanie Kellner and Bill Black, yes. and I'm drawing a blank on some of the other names. I can see their faces on this program over and over and over again. It's probably been about a year though since we had any of them on. We need to get back to that because modern monetary theory is good, solid stuff. Naked Capitalism is a great website for that, and then Stephanie has one, isn't it called Modern Monetary? What do you know her website?
I do not.
Okay. There is one website that's sort of like Modern Monetary Theory Central. And I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. Like I said, it's been a while since we've had them on, but I need to get back to it. What did you want to say about it?
Well, I'm always asking myself, what do we know and why do we or don't we know it? And, ideas that are politically correct get talked about or not. Sometimes it's described as, well, it wouldn't do to say. Mm-hmm. So those things get left out. But in 1971, we had fiat currency created by the Nixon administration as international, recovery from loans were pressing our own gold reserves. So Nixon just said, guess what? No more gold to back.
Yeah, it wasn't loans. It was that people, or countries actually, were redeeming dollars for gold in Fort Knox, and the size of the money supply had exceeded the size of the gold supply, and it didn't make any sense. The problem with the gold standard is if your economy grows faster than your supply of gold grows, then you, by necessity, have deflation, which is very, very destructive to an economy. And that's why we went from the gold standard to a fiat currency. I support Nixon's decision.
Exactly. And the value of this thing is that all of a sudden we have access to a way of interacting with currency / economic reserves in a way that permitted our recovery, our free fall from the 2008 financial crisis, as Ben Bernanke went up to the banks and marked up the size of their accounts.
Right.
That's actually his worth.
We created about $17 trillion worth of money out of thin air.
Exactly.
And then pushed it into the system.
With you know.
By the way, Rich, Chris tells me that Stephanie Kellner's website is neweconomicperspectives.org. So check it out. It's one of the better ones. Forgive me, you were saying.
So the idea here is that we have an opportunity to deal with what is this upcoming shortfall in a way that were we tied to physical gold, it wouldn't be possible.
Right.
And this is something that can be done for the benefit of us all as we take goods and services built with a free pot of money to create the value that we're looking to stabilize the system with.
Yep. And this is also, one of the heresies that they promote is the idea that the national debt is irrelevant, that because we own our own currency, we can wipe it out anytime we want. It's not a big deal. The only reason that that Pete Peterson and other Wall Street billionaires are screaming about it is because they don't want people investing their money in treasuries. They want people putting their money into Wall Street.
Yep.
And also they had that idea of, print 6 or 8 platinum coins. The Constitution allows for this. Value them at $1 trillion each, redeem them at the Treasury Department, and wipe out the national debt, or at least a good chunk of it. The problem is if you wipe out the debt, you wipe out the ability of people to save money with the federal government, which makes the bankers on Wall Street happy but screws the rest of us. The last time that happened, when the debt was wiped out, it was wiped out by Andrew Jackson, and it led to a 7-year-long depression, the worst and the deepest in the history of the United States. But you're right. Yeah. The reason why the Great Depression scenario wasn't played out in 2008 was in large part because the Fed could invent money out of thin air and pump it into the system.
Yeah, we're calling it
quantitative easing.
QE and QE2.
Yeah.
Quantitative easing. Well, there's something else that is a think tank for the good. It's the Binziger Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Binziger is Binzagar.
Okay.
And they're working to come at this problem in a way that is to combat what was the bank business decision for super profits out of the collateral damage.
Yeah. I just wrote it down. Binziger. Binzigar, right?
I think it's an A. Binzagar.
Okay, great. I'll have to check it out. I can't comment on it, Rich, because I don't know anything about it, but I'll check it out. But if it's modern monetary theory, I'm all in. I mean, this stuff makes so much sense to me. Rich, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Professor Hartmann, smartest man in all media, and you are such. And I heard you on KPFK, where I know the wisest man in all of media, and that's Blaise Pompain. Have you ever met him?
I beg your pardon?
Have you ever met Blaise Pompain?
I think so. I did my show from KPFK a couple years back, but I'm not absolutely certain.
Anyhow, I first wanted to see if any of your smartest listeners know that if George H.W. Bush was involved in a treasonous act, though John Fielding said it's not treason if they're not tried and convicted. So it is still a treasonous act. Did George H.W. Bush meet with Madame Tu? Was the NSA and the CIA complicit in 20-some thousand American soldiers being killed because Richard Nixon committed a treasonous act?
According to Lyndon Johnson, the answer is yes. It's just we only learned about it about 6 years ago.
Wow.
It took that long for the Johnson Library to get around to releasing those tapes of Richard Nixon talking to Everett Dirksen, which I play on this program at least every 3 months. But yeah, Jim, I think we've got a serious problem here, and it's one that we need to be addressing. And the way to address it is, the traditional disinfectant, which is sunlight. Jim, thanks for the call. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's in your mind?
Thank you, Guru. Several weeks ago, you and I had a conversation about copyrights, and you said I should read Thomas Jefferson, and I did. Thank you for the homework. My question is, let's say that all of the copyrights for your books expires today, and the publishers continue to sell new copies of your books. Would you still get a piece?
That's up to, that would be a matter to be negotiated between me and my publishers. And I'm guessing that, and see, Jefferson's position was copyrights should expire at the end of 3 years. And I mean, that's what he ultimately came to. He was originally sort of opposed to all of them in principle. He never copyrighted anything, he never patented anything, and he invented over 250 major inventions. Because he thought everything that was done, particularly by him, he felt like he was a public servant. His life should be given to society. But if copyrights expired at the end of 3 years, which is an idea that as an author and as the producer of a copyrighted program, I mean, you and I talking right now, this is copyrighted as well, or it's intellectual property, my intellectual property. I think that at the end of 3 years, it should go into the public domain. But that said, you know, if a publisher wants to publish my stuff and pay me for it, that's something I think that we could be able to negotiate. Maybe not, but I think at the end of the day, it would probably help writers because it would make good writing more widely available. But no, oh yeah, okay. That's just my opinion. Why'd you ask, David?
Well, that's I didn't understand exactly where this goes. I feel that if the corporations are still making money off of your thousands of hours of work and research and education and rewriting, that you should still be making some portion of that too.
I don't disagree, but on the other hand, if it simply means that my works are more widely distributed, that is going to create a larger audience for my stuff that is still in copyright, my more recent stuff. David, thanks for the call.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, I'm perfectly willing to compromise at 10 years, 7 years, even 15 years, but this 70-year stuff, this is crazy. Welcome back. Did they freeze Walt Disney's head or his entire body? Do you know, Chris? Nate, do you know? Yeah, yeah, both but separately. Oh my God, yeah, because the copyright, they got extended in part to protect the mouse. I mean, that was the whole thing. So anyhow, we're in a Free Speech TV break right now. Yes, okay. So Kathy, watching Free Speech TV in Pleasant Hill, Missouri. Hey, Kathy, thanks for watching us on DirecTV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I served on a federal grand jury, and in case people don't know a lot about them, they're not like a regular jury. There are 23 members on grand juries, and you are impaneled for 18 months, and you serve 1 week every 2 months or so. And members are from all over, approximately half of your state. So they pull people from all over. There are several grand juries working at one time, and by the time we were given evidence on the cases, the evidence was overwhelmingly enough for an indictment. So this kind of gives me hope.
Yeah, yeah.
Prosecutors, they don't bring it before a grand jury unless they have lots and lots of evidence. So,
generally speaking, I mean, sometimes grand juries can be abused. They can be used for fishing expeditions or harassment. But it's just like a scalpel. It's a powerful, powerful tool that can heal or wound.
Yeah, and people really make a commitment to it. When you sign up for 18 months.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. It's serious stuff. Kathy, I've always been concerned that grand juries have that basically you can't assert your Fifth Amendment rights before a grand jury. Am I wrong in that, or what are you, having served on a grand jury, what are your thoughts on that?
That happened, exactly. There were witnesses that came up and they pleaded the Fifth, so it does happen.
And they were not penalized for that?
I don't know a lot, but yeah, it happened, so.
Yeah. It's a question I really should put to a lawyer, somebody.
Yeah. But I mean, it does happen, and like I said, I don't know for sure what happened to that case because we're just there to say yes, you have enough evidence for an indictment. That's our job.
Yeah. And so, in that context, people hear the word jury and they think, a jury of your peers sitting in judgment of you. Grand juries don't ultimately render decisions. They are prosecutors' tools as opposed to the equivalent of a judge. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We say
so.
Go ahead, or nope, you can't.
Yeah.
You don't have enough. So yeah.
And is your service on the grand jury sealed and sworn forever? You can't talk about the details of it?
I don't know about forever. I know that during your time, that is true.
Right.
I don't recall about a forever thing.
Right. Are grand juries ever sequestered?
I guess if maybe the case is a big thing out in the public, it could be. They did when they pulled people. Remember how many miles away, but at a certain mileage, they stayed for the week. They put you in a hotel and fed you in the whole bit.
Right.
So if it's something really big in public, yeah, that could probably happen.
Yeah, very interesting. Kathy, thanks for sharing your experience with us. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the end. Welcome back. Trace in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Trace, what's on your mind today?
I just wanted to ask you have you heard of Oxbridge Academy?
Oxbridge?
Yes.
No.
So the other Koch brother, Bill Koch, he founded a school in West Palm Beach. It's called Oxbridge Academy, and it opened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and immediately there was just scandal and scandal and scandal, and their solution to it was to get rid of the people involved in the scandal, including the whistleblowers, including the people who came forward with the actions that they were wronged with. Right. And I just thought that it was very interesting that Trump's education secretary picked Betsy DeVos, who gave a ton of money to the university that was literally across the street from the property that Bill Koch set up his school at, used the Florida system as the system for her to push a national educational platform.
Oh my! I said, oh my!
Yeah. So living in Florida and living literally in the area that these things are going on in, I'm exposed to it a lot. I read about it a lot. I'm just putting the pieces together of how it's all one big cluster of corruption and scandal, and it's really sad to see what's going on, and it's sad to see that education is being watered down, and it's becoming a real business.
Yeah, it really is, and this is how we destroy public education in the United States. Turn it into a profit center for billionaires, and that's so sad. Trace, thanks for the information. I'll have to check it out. I don't know that much about Bill Koch and what he's doing down there, but I'll check it out. Tina in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Tina, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller, but I've been listening with you and merged with you and Ed Schultz.
Well, thank you.
And I enjoy the show. It's fantastic. My thought is on boycotting. Just like the protest marches have had big impact, the power of our numbers seems to be not utilized as much as it could be, whether it's companies, leagues, banks, states, whatever it is, media. If we could use some of those wonderful tech-savvy people, which I'm not, but I know they're out there, and it's amazing how quickly they can assemble information and get it out to people so that those products, specific products or whatever they happen to be, we start making our dollars count, and they will pay attention, whether it's the banks or anything.
Mm-hmm. So how specifically would you suggest we do this, Tina? I agree with your goals. I'm not sure how to get there.
I'm just saying that if they developed an online reference for people to write in, like we've talked about the Koch brother products.
Right.
We've talked about some of the banks, or even to support a bank, the banks that, whether it's, I don't know if it's credit union or whatever, the type of banks that we should be moving toward.
Kind of a progressive agenda and activism website that lists all these things that you could do and all the organizations out there. You know, we could build something like that. So what? Yeah, and places to boycott. We could build something like that onto our website. Let me have a conversation with some of our folks about that. I mean, it's a great idea, Tina, and I'm not. I frankly don't know of anything out there like that. Although perhaps there is, and people will tell me, you know, after they hear this. Tina, I've got to move along, but thank you.
I hope so, because you're wonderful, and if it's possible, I can't thank you enough.
Okay, thank you, Tina, and thank you so much for the call. Paul in Benton, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. You know, I remember a while back you said, you know, we're at a crossroads in this country where, you know, we could either go the, you know, like the FDR route, or, you know, the other route, like what happened in Germany, and
or in Italy, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, the fascist route. And unfortunately, it seems to be it's like the latter is coming to fruition. And I was wondering, you know, it's like, you know, we're going to have this whole segment of our society that will basically be, you know, unemployable, and you know, I was thinking, like, well, what's going to happen to them? And I thought about it. You know, it's like there's no better way to get rid of them than let everybody have all the guns they want and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't.
It's a shame.
I don't think that the NRA and the drug companies are engaged in a population reducing conspiracy. I think they're just trying to make as much money as they can, and they don't care if people die. The other thing is tobacco. I was amazed. In fact, it's a story that's in my pile here that I never got to this week, from earlier this week in the New York Times, that points out that 50%, half of all people who smoke, will die of the smoking itself. Half. It's mind-boggling. I mean, you know, this is a product where, when used as directed, leads to death. It's the only product allowed to be sold in the United States when used as directed, leads to death. So I would add tobacco to that list, and maybe even alcohol. You know, you got 50,000 people a year in the United States who die from alcohol-related illnesses.
Yeah. I just, you know, like I say, I keep wondering, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with the Molly Maguires, and which is basically almost right in my backyard. And I keep thinking, you know, if we keep going down this road like we're going, if that's what if we're gonna see a repeat of that, like, you know, history repeating itself.
I don't know what the Molly Maguires are, Paul.
The coal miners back in the 1800s.
Oh, the strikes, the massacre.
I read some, you know, fascinating book on them and everything, and I mean, it's like the mine owners were, they ran the courts, they ran the police departments and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And
it was oligarchy. Paul, we're out of time. It's the end of the show. I'm sorry to cut you off, but, you know, I've got to. So anyhow, thanks so much for being with us this week. It's a fascinating week. Trump has gone on a 17-day vacation. I'm not sure that's going to restrain him from being bizarre on Twitter. Anyhow, have a great weekend, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs
You've been
you.
listening to
Tag
Thom
you're it.
Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets.
Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.